The gods and demigods of Elden Ring have been a consistent topic of conversation across the lore community. Some of their stories seemed fairly straightforward, like Godric the Grafted, a demigod whose powerful bloodline was deeply diluted, making him the weakest of the family. Or Rykard, the man who fed himself to the serpent so that he could rise against the Erd Tree. However, when we look below the surface, every godlike being in the lands between has a rich story with small details that better explain who they really were and their possible motivations during the Shattering. In this compilation of videos from the Elden Lore series, we'll be showcasing any content created around these demigods, whether it's speculated on their relationships or told their stories from beginning to end. So sit back, relax, and close your eyes if you use these videos to fall asleep, and let's revisit all the godlike beings of Elden Ring. Before getting into the compilation, I wanted to take a minute to thank this video sponsor, Deck Talk. Deck Talk brings technology and aesthetics together to improve the look and feel of your living room, gaming space, office, or any other room in your home. I was sent the smart LED floor lamp with projection and the smart foldable floor lamp to test the products, and I could not be happier with them. They not only add significant ambiance, but they're energy efficient and have a myriad of options using the Deck Talk app, including making your own mood lighting. The projector floor lamp is also a great addition for holidays and birthdays, adding to your decorations with the flip of a switch. The foldable lamp also has mounting options, so it doesn't just have to be freestanding. You could buy multiple lamps and mount them on your wall to come up with creative and interesting designs. These lamps are also compatible with Google Home and Amazon Alexa, meaning you have access to voice activation. Bring a little something special to your home with Black Friday deals netting you up to 60% off Deck Talk products. Thank you again to Deck Talk for sponsoring the channel. Now let's return to Elden Lore. It's been over 3 years since the release of Elden Ring, and after all this time, it's still amazing to look back at the game and dig through the finer details of even the most well-known characters. The stories of Radahn, Malenia, Miquella, and Ranni are still as mysterious as they have ever been, because even though we've learned so much more over time, not every question has a straight answer. Even so, we continue to explore and try to reach a better understanding of this world and its players. However, I want us to take a closer look at someone you've likely forgotten about. This royal golden heir is now nothing more than an entertaining diversion when we make our way through another new run of Elden Ring. A boss no one would ever consider a stumbling point anymore. Today I'm taking a closer look at Godric the Grafted, the coward, the pitiable, the lord of all that is golden who barely held his own castle. Godric was likely once nothing more than a boy who knew he could never live up to his lineage, and that constant feeling of inadequacy created a man with an unquenchable thirst to make himself more powerful, by any means necessary. Godric was not always known as the Grafted. He once carried the same title as the favorite child of the Golden Order, Godwyn the Golden. When facing him, he calls himself the Golden, and it would be easy to assume that it's a name he had given himself. But Morgott also refers to him as Godric the Golden. This means that the Grafted moniker he's taken on is likely one he does not particularly want or like. I think it's fair to assume his title of the Grafted is an insult that's been foisted upon him by those who saw him debase his holy flesh, due to his desperate need to be seen as equal in power and status to the rest of his demigod family. Indeed, this would have been seen as shameful for a descendant of the golden son of Marika and Godfrey. However, it's not as if he had much choice in the matter. When speaking with Kenneth Haidt, he refers to Godric as a jumped-up country bumpkin, and expresses disbelief that he is part of the family line that stretches directly back to Godfrey himself. I believe that if the great Kenneth Haidt saw Godric this way, it's likely the other common people of the lands between did as well. And if that's the case, there must have been a reason. As far as we know, Godwyn had no consort. He likely had Ranni promised to him, as they would have been the perfect couple to take over for Marika and Radagon. However, the Knight of Black Knives ensured this would never come to pass. This means that in order for Godric to be of the same stock as Godwyn, he must have had other consorts in the lands between who were considered common women. If this were the case, Godwyn must have had at least one child to carry on his bloodline, but I don't think that child was Godric. Inside Neverjail, we can find and do battle with a man known as Godfrey the Grafted. You'd be forgiven for thinking this is simply a cut and paste of the Godric fight, so we can pad out the jails. However, this character actually has lore significance. The ancient dragon knight Kristoff's ashes tell us, after the first defense of Leyndell, Kristoff earned the hero's honor of Erdtree burial for the feat of capturing Godfrey the Grafted. This means that Godfrey not only marched on Leyndell during the Shattering, but he's likely the father of Godric. If Godfrey is Godric's father, that would separate him even more from the Golden lineage, as he's at least a whole generation removed from their bloodline. With that said, the proof of his heritage is apparent, not only in his obsession with gold and Godfrey, but in his very flesh itself. It's impossible to say whether or not Godfrey was the first to discover the art of grafting, but it was certainly made a part of his family. Godric likely grew up around the art of grafting, a symbolic act that, while considered shameful, is actually an interesting interpretation of the Golden lineage's connection to the Erdtree. Tree grafting is the process of joining a part of one tree, the scion, to the root system of another, the rootstock, so that they may grow as a single plant. This horticultural technique is used for purposes like changing a tree's variety, saving time, or repairing damaged plants. It involves making precise cuts to join the two plants, and securing the union with tape or wax until they fuse together. So just as the Golden lineage is inextricably connected to the Erdtree, those that practice grafting make of themselves a rootstock. They are the trees that gain strength through the art of melding their flesh with those that carry some level of power. Interestingly, the proof of his lineage is that Godric and his grafted scions don't need any kind of tape or wax to graft. Their flesh can be traced all the way back to the shamans, who were capable of harmoniously melding with others. While his family likely never knew it, they were practicing the arts of the horn scent that arguably may have created their bloodline in the first place with Marika. Given how Marika felt about the horn scent, this is another reason the Golden lineage may have looked down on Godric. With this in mind, it's fair to say that regardless of how weak he is, how diluted his demigod blood may be, he is the true heir to Godwyn the Golden. But it's likely he was raised in Stormvale Castle, where his family worshipped their connection to Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. He was steeped in the imagery of this lord, and believes he'll someday be delivered to a land of honeyed rays of gold. However, this focus on his lineage left Godric obsessed with strength and status. Since we know Godfrey practiced the art of grafting, it's likely Godric started at a young age as well. We know that he sent his forces out into the lands between on Tarnished hunts, as the Tarnished were known as the people of Godfrey's tribe, capable of wielding great strength. For this reason, the Tarnished would be rounded up and brought to Godric, so that he might pick and choose the strongest pieces amongst them to graft to his own body and those of his scions, chasing the strength of his bloodline so that the other demigods would take him seriously. One thing I'm having trouble reconciling is when exactly Godric started grafting himself. It is said that the Tarnished hunts were meant to make him stronger. However, it's implied he also took Gostok's arm for grafting. So presumably, Godric started grafting before the Tarnished came back to the lands between, trying to make himself more powerful. I think we can assume that Godric started grafting himself after the Shattering. We know that Godfrey grafted before him, and it was likely something that was always expected of Godric. But it wouldn't be until the demigods started marching against each other that he would truly need this strength. During the first siege of Leyndell, Godfrey was captured and Godric escaped with his life, thanks to the Mimic Veil. When Godric was hounded from Leyndell, the royal capital, this was one of the multitude of treasures he took with him, also known as Marika's Mischief. Thanks to Kenneth Haidt, we know that he used the veil to hide amongst the womenfolk fleeing the capital, and as we know from using the veil, it doesn't alter your size substantially, so we can assume Godric was not yet as large as he is when our Tarnished faces him. I believe it was after he fled the capital during the siege that he started grafting in earnest. From here, he made strides to become as powerful as possible, but when Radahn came to his castle, he hid rather than facing his towering uncle. Perhaps it was fear, as well as arrogance and envy, that pushed Godric down this path, as he could clearly see how much stronger his family was with their less diluted demigod blood. After cowering behind Stormvale's walls at the presence of Radahn, Godric would go on to graft himself over and over again, believing he was gaining some kind of true power, enough to challenge his family. This newfound confidence saw him insult Malenia, who promptly showed him just how weak he was compared to the rest of the demigods, and rather than accept his death, he groveled with her for his life. I can't say why Malenia spared him, but perhaps it has something to do with Miquella's affection for Godwyn the Golden. It's implied he had a good relationship with his stepbrother, so perhaps he didn't want his hand to cut down what little was left of the brother he lost so long ago. From here, we know little else about Godric. He ordered Edgar the Revenger to take back Castle Morn from the Misbegotten, and procure the grafted Great Blade so that it was not sullied by the hands of these subhuman creatures. This weapon is known as the Storied Sword of Castle Morn, a Revenger's weapon. It is burdened with oceans of anger and regret, one of the legendary armaments. A lone surviving champion from a country now vanished was so determined to continue fighting that he claimed the swords of an entire clan of warriors. You could argue that the man who claimed the swords of these warriors was Godfrey, making this blade another attempt by Godric to recreate himself in the image of his ancestor. He also started having his main forces leave the castle in order to hunt Tarnished, so that he might graft their parts on himself and his scions. But he also filled his castle with other warriors to defend him. I assume that Godric did not trust his forces that were closely tied to the Golden Order, because we see none of them within the walls of Stormvale. Instead, we fight exiled soldiers, as well as banished knights, an omen, a troll, a grafted scion, and even a crucible knight. These forces were built to defend the castle from within, while his original army was essentially living in exile, with their only purpose being to bring him more Tarnished, to make their lord stronger. I believe this is why we find the Soldier of God, Rick, in the tutorial area. At the bottom of a cavern, Tarnished were likely thrown into quite often upon reaching the Lands Between. It makes sense. When your own forces were granted to you by Leyndell, and the demigods sitting at the head of the capital have deemed you worthless, how could you possibly trust these soldiers not to revolt against you? Godric proved himself to be a coward time and again, so how could he trust his soldiers would not think the worst of him, and act on those thoughts? Here is where we make our way to the Lands Between, encountering Roderica, who warns us about the spider, and Margit, who tests our mettle before we reach Stormvale Castle. We find our way through to the end, where we encounter Nefeli Loux, who confirms all we've heard about Godric up to this point.
How utterly repellent this is. This grafting of Godric's ill befits a lord. He's tainted the very winds. If you intend to challenge Godric, I ask you call upon me. The winds run foul with his deeds. I'm certain Father would permit me aid the fight.
With or without Nefeli's help, we press forward and face Godric the Grafted.
Mighty dragon, thou'rt a true-born heir. Lend me thy strength, O kindred. Deliver me unto greater heights. Well. The lonely tarnished. Plain as a lord. command thee now. I am the Lord of all that is golden.
He fights wildly with an axe reminiscent of his ancestor Godfrey, but the axe is covered in gold. He's attempting to evoke the strength of both Godfrey and Godwyn in battle, but his monstrous form shows just how far he's divested himself from his golden roots. In fact, once the tarnish cuts Godric down enough, he mutilates himself even further.
Truest of dragons, lend me thy strength.
With the strength of a dragon, the creatures Godwyn once made peace with, grafted to his very arm, Godric believes there is no one capable of stopping him. However, he's yet to meet the Tarnished guided by both Grace and Melina. Godric is finally brought to his knees, killed by one of the very people he's had grafted to his body over and over again. And after leaving the area and returning, we see what's left of him. The grafted parts of his body have melted away, leaving only his head and a small amount of torso, which is being crushed beneath the heel of the gatekeeper Gostok. Godric has paid for his crimes against the Tarnished and his people, and his throne is now vacant, ready for another descendant of Godfrey to take his place and rule with fairness rather than madness. This is the story of Godric the Grafted, a man who was likely raised to believe his only chance of gaining respect from his family was to prove his strength. He sat on a throne won by his ancestors, but allowed the shadow of their power to wash over him, filling him with feelings of inadequacy that would manifest as a lust for strength, using the only means he had available to him, his malleable shaman flesh. As he grew in strength, so too did his bravado, and time and again, he was put back in his place by his demigod family. Godric the Golden is a pitiable creature who committed horrific acts in an attempt to prove his worth. And being put to the blade by our Tarnished is probably the best death he could have asked for. At the very least, his life was ended by the person who would take the throne, the future Elden Lord. Thank you for sticking with me as I took a look at one of the best-known enemies in Elden Ring. Do you believe Godric the Grafted is the grandson of Godwyn the Golden? Or were there more generations between them? Was the practice of grafting something Godric indulged in all of his life? Or was it a means to an end when it came to striving for power? Why did he risk speaking poorly of Melania, a demigod known to be one of the most dangerous living beings in the lands between? Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comments. Watch that button light up as I say like this video, and if you think we've earned it, please subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss out on any of our lore dives. We look forward to seeing you again for more Elden lore. If there's one demigod outside of Miquella we'd all want to learn more about, I'd argue it's Godwyn the Golden, Marika's firstborn golden son, who was beloved throughout the lands between. By the time we reach the fields of Limgrave, Godwyn the Golden is known by a new moniker, the Prince of Death. All that the lands between has become started with the death of Godwyn, and history remembers him fondly as a hero, struck down due to the machinations of a traitor within the Golden Order. There are few who know the truth behind the death of Godwyn the Golden, or how hard some in this land fight to save him from his gruesome fate. And today we want to shine a light on this man. While we will never see what Godwyn the Golden could do in his prime, there is a chance this Prince of the Golden Order could be involved in the story moving forward, due to the relationship he may have built with his youngest brother. So today we discuss all we know about Godwyn, and consider what his role could be after we find ourselves standing beneath the shadow of the Erd Tree. Godwyn the Golden is the first son of Queen Marika and Elden Lord Godfrey, and while not stated anywhere definitively, I believe he is the firstborn of their union as he lines up well with the motif of the Golden Sun. We can assume that Godwyn grew up in a time of abundance, seeing his father commit heroic deeds in the many wars that raged across the lands between. And at some point, his parents had two more sons, the Omen twins Morgott and Mohg. Whether or not Godwyn was ever made aware of them, we don't know, as the Omen children of royalty were banished to the catacombs beneath Leyndell. It's possible Godwyn never truly met his brothers, thinking himself an only child, until the children of Rennala and Radagon became his step-siblings, and his mother had the twin prodigies, Malenia and Miquella, with her new husband. But that was not until much later in his life. From here we don't know anything definitively about how Godwyn was raised, but we do know he grew to be a formidable warrior and a shrewd diplomat, taking after both of his parents. Somewhere down the line, Godwyn would become not just nobility, but a hero to the people of the lands between. The Bolt of Grandsax tells us, a great ancient dragon, Grandsax once rained calamity upon the royal capital, the only time in historical record that Leyndell's walls have fallen. This marked the dawn of the war against the ancient dragons. This war was where Godwyn took control of the forces of Leyndell and drew his line in the sand. It's unknown who or how Grandsax was defeated, but it's fair to assume that Godwyn was in some way involved in the battle that led to this massive dragon now laying its corpse along the capital city. Like his father before him, Godwyn would become a legend on the battlefield for leading his people to victory against the dragons and defeating one of their strongest warriors, Fortisax, who was once called the mightiest boulder stone. The incantation Lightning Spear tells us, long ago, Godwyn the Golden defeated the ancient dragon Fortisax and befriended his fallen foe, an event that gave rise to the ancient dragon cult in the capital. Godwyn had the opportunity to drive the dragons from Leyndell and prove his superiority over them, but unlike his father who thirsted for battle, Godwyn the Golden saw an opportunity for peace and a consolidation of power. Through his friendship with the ancient dragons, Godwyn created the Ancient Dragon Cult, a group that accepted dragons as part of the natural order of things. The Gravelstone seal tells us it is a sacred seal made from gravelstone, thought to be an ancient dragon scale, enhances dragon cult incantations of the royal capital. The worship of the ancient dragons does not conflict with belief in the Erd Tree. After all, this seal and lightning itself are both imbued with gold. The dragon cult became a group where dragons would take human form and share their knowledge and strength with humans who dedicated themselves to their study. Through Lansseax's glaive, we know that Lansseax was the sister of Fortisax. It is said that she took the form of a human to commune with the knights as a priestess of the ancient dragon cult. She became particularly fond of Vike the Dragon Spear, a member of the cult who likely served under Godwyn, imbuing him with his own dragon bolt. Of all the knights, Vike the Dragon Spear was the one Lansseax loved most of all. For a time, the ancient dragon cult thrived, and with it, we can assume Godwyn the Golden did as well. His bond with Fortisax was unshakable, and he continued to live his life as the golden child of the Golden Order. Time passed as various wars were fought across the lands between, including one where a Golden Order fundamentalist rose to prominence while fighting against the forces of Liurnia. Marika consolidated her power, banished her husband, Godwyn's father, from her lands, ordering him to take the Tarnished with him. She remarried to Radagon making his children demigods, and even sired a pair of twins, both born with terrible afflictions. Through all of this, Godwyn remained relatively quiet, doing nothing worthy of note. But given Miquella's potential fondness for him, we can assume he was a good and loving sibling, at least to those he shared parentage with. I believe that during this quiet time in his history, Godwyn sired heirs of his own, but not with other demigods. Godric the Grafted is said to be a distant relation to the Golden Order, his blood sorely diluted, and he refers to himself as Godric the Golden, as does Morgott before we face him at the foot of the Erd Tree. It's fair to assume, given this knowledge and the words of Kenneth Haight, that Godric traces his lineage back to Godwyn, and his status as a jumped-up country bumpkin leads me to believe that Godwyn must have had consorts during his lifetime that were less suitable to his status as the firstborn of Marika and Godfrey. This side of him was likely kept from the public eye, lest it tarnish his radiant reputation. But soon, his reputation would be the least of his worries. On one unassuming night, Godwyn was murdered by the Black Knife assassins. This plot was devised by the Lunar Princess Ranni as a way to free herself from her fate as an Empyrean. Ranni never accepted her role as a potential vessel for the Elden Ring. Her studies of the moon led her to follow a different path and turn away from the machinations of her two fingers. In order to free herself from the confines of her own body and be free to choose her own path, Ranni needed to slay her Empyrean flesh. But the only way to do this without forfeiting her soul was to have another demigod slain simultaneously. In this ritual, the Black Knives would kill the body of one demigod and the soul of another, leaving each of them without half of themselves. The curse mark of death tells us 2 demigods perished at the same time, breaking the curse mark into 2 half-wheels. Ranni was the first of the demigods whose flesh perished, while the Prince of Death perished in soul alone. Presumably, any demigod would have worked for this ritual, but Ranni chose Godwyn, and I have a theory as to why. When we look at the Empyreans the Fingers had to choose from, Ranni was the only suitable vessel for the Elden Ring. Melania lived with her accursed rot, afflicted by an outer god other than the Greater Will. And Miquella was cursed with eternal youth, unable to grow into a suitable vessel. This made Ranni the only option, and she was likely being prepared for this throughout her life. As we know, the lands between would need an Elden Lord when it came to be Ranni's time to inherit the Elden Ring, and what better candidate was there than Godwyn the Golden? If Ranni was being forced into a marriage of sorts with Godwyn, it would make sense why she'd choose him as the demigod whose soul she would slay in order to save her own. No matter what you believe Marika's involvement may have been with the plot, it makes sense that Godwyn would be the prime target for causing distress amongst the Golden Order. The Golden Sun would be cut down by death itself, and the result would have far-reaching implications across the land. As we all know, the death of Godwyn the Golden was the inciting incident behind the Shattering. After this, Marika would break the Elden Ring, Radagon would try desperately to fix it, and the pair would be locked within the Erd Tree, crucified and sharing one body, until a new Elden Lord would come to claim the ring. But this was not the end of Godwyn's story. Because Ranni slew her body and Godwyn died in soul, the remains of each were left behind. Ranni's soul now inhabits a puppet made to look like the snowy crone she once studied under. But Godwyn was left as nothing but a husk, a body without a soul, touched by death itself. His remains would be buried at the roots of the Erd Tree, and from there, something happened that we doubt anyone in the Golden Order expected. He began to grow. Deathblight found its way back to the lands between through the body of Godwyn the Golden, and it began to infect the roots of the land. Godwyn's body became twisted and deformed, resembling more of a fish than of the golden demigod he once was. His body stretched so far that it even reached Stormvale Castle, where we can see his horrible visage, grown again deep below the castle. this is not the only example of how far the influence of death has stretched past Godwyn's body, as we can also find crustaceous creatures bearing the same deformed faces on their backs. When we find the Prince of Death's cyst, far below the surface in the deep root depths, it tells us it is a fetid, overgrown cyst taken from facial flesh. It is said that this cyst came from the corrupt visage of one unable to die a true death. Indeed, it comes from the Prince of Death, scion of the Golden Bough, and first of the dead among the demigods. So death continues its slow spread across the land, spreading from the corpse of Godwyn, the Prince of Death. Some would come to fight against this death, while others embraced it. Godwyn's friend, the ancient dragon Fortisax, would take it upon himself to fight back against the power of death that now inhabited the body of his companion. Though we don't know how, Fortisax used the power of sleep to enter the dreams of Godwyn's undead corpse, and attempted to purge death from within. Unfortunately, we come to fight Fortisax ourselves, but he's nothing more than a shadow of his former glory. He became the Lich Dragon, and his remembrance tells us his story. After Godwyn the Golden became the Prince of Death, the ancient dragon fought long and hard against the death within its companion. Alas, victory was never achieved, and its only reward was corruption. So it was that the two friends who founded the ancient dragon cult would become corrupted by death and broken by its power. But Fortisax wasn't the only one who fought on Godwyn's behalf. We have to assume that Godwyn and his younger brother Miquella had a strong relationship, because it seems he too sought to save his brother from the clutches of destined death. The adherents of Castle Sol believed that an eclipse held a certain kind of power. The Eclipse Great Shield tells us, the eclipse sun, drained of color, is the protective star of soulless demigods. It aids the Mausoleum Knights by keeping destined death at bay. And the Eclipse Crest Heater Shield tells us, the sun in eclipse is said to be the symbol of the Wandering Mausoleum, where the soulless demigods slumber. There are also two spirits found in Castle Sol that discuss the power of the eclipse and its ties to Miquella's plans. O great sun, frigid son of Sol, surrender yourself to the eclipse, grant life to the soulless bones. Lord Miquella, forgive me. The sun has not been swallowed. Our prayers were lacking. Your comrade remains soulless. I'll never set my eyes upon it now. Your divine Halig Tree. Keeping in mind that it seems as if the leader of Castle Sol, Commander Nail, is the father of Commander O'Neill, who held the unalloyed gold needle, it seems that all who were stationed at Castle Sol followed Miquella, and were there attempting to grant a true death to the first of the soulless demigods. In this way, we can see how Miquella cared for his older brother, and wanted to reverse the horrific fate that was set upon him. This is further confirmed by a weapon we can find at the entrance to the Oriza hero's grave, known as the Golden Epitaph. Its description tells us it is a sword made to commemorate the death of Godwyn the Golden, first of the demigods to die, infused with the humble prayer of a young boy. O brother, Lord brother, please die a true death. We could also take the time to get into Fia's plans for Godwyn, but we go into detail about that already in our video on Fia, the Deathbed Companion, and it has much more to do with bringing about an Age of Death restored than it does with Godwyn himself. So if you're interested in that side of the topic, I suggest you check out our video on Fia. With the life and death of Godwyn the Golden laid out in front of us, one important question still remains. Will the soulless demigod, firstborn of Marika and Godfrey, have any bearing on our journey through the Land of Shadows? Many jumped at the idea of Godwyn being depicted in various ways during the first gameplay trailer, but after the story trailer, I feel like this is significantly less likely than we initially suspected. The Land of Shadow exists outside of the Lands Between, cut off entirely but for those who found a way to slip through, either by stripping themselves of their Empyrean flesh, or by following the guidance of Miquella, as we can see from his adherents. We do know that Miquella tended to focus on helping others, curing Melania's affliction, and saving his golden brother from living in death. So perhaps that's why he entered the Land of Shadow in the first place, looking for answers. Thanks to Miyazaki, we do know that however the story of Shadow of the Erdtree ends, it won't affect the main plot of Elden Ring. So if we were to see Godwyn on the other side, he's going to stay there. Because if Godwyn ever did find a way to be reunited in body and soul, and made his way back to the Lands Between, this fearsome warrior would likely alter the course of history. Thank you for joining us for this look at the story of Godwyn the Golden, both before and after his death on the Night of Black Knives. Do you think we missed anything during our analysis? Did Godwyn have illegitimate children across the Lands Between? Or did Godric have some other relation to the Golden Order and simply take the name, the Golden, for himself? What is the nature of the relationship between Godwyn and Miquella? Was it personal for Ranni when she chose Godwyn as her sacrifice for freeing herself from the bonds of her Empyrean flesh? And lastly, do you think Godwyn will play a role in Shadow of the Erdtree? Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell, and set notifications to all so you never miss out on any of our lore dives. We look forward to seeing you again for more Elden Lore. The Omen are not only persecuted in the Lands Between, but often outright disposed of upon birth due to the removal of their horns. Those that manage to survive this act of brutality seem to be subjugated and forced to use their incredible strength to the benefit of the very people who despise their existence. These people who have committed no crime are forced from birth to withstand a harrowing life, however short it may be. But if they are lucky enough to be born to a noble family, then they're at least given the kindness of being allowed to live below the capital city of Leyndell. This even applies to those that are born to the Queen of the Land herself. Morgott and Mohg, the Omen twins, were born into the royal family, sons of Elden Lord Godfrey, and even with their incredible status, they too were banished to the catacombs, until fate intervened, and the brothers took wildly different paths in order to serve their gods. With so much talk in the community about how Omen may play a part in the Land of Shadow once the DLC is finally in our hands, we thought now would be a good time to take a closer look at the Omen twins, their lives, and their ambitions. Morgott and Mohg were born to one of the highest stations possible in the Lands Between, that of the Demigods, children of Marika and Godfrey. But the tragedy of their birth is that they entered the world touched by the primordial crucible, Omen. Unfortunately, Marika considered the Omen a curse on her land, and under her rule, these babies were to have their horns removed upon birth. The Omen Bairn tells us it is a doll of a curse-born bairn. Omen babies have all their horns excised, causing most to perish. These fetishes are made to memorialize them. Please don't hate me or curse me. Please. When it came to the Omen twins, the regal Omen Baron explains why they retain their horns. Doll of a curse-born bear from the Erdtree's royal line. Omen babies born of royalty do not have their horns excised, but instead are kept underground, unbeknownst to anyone, imprisoned for eternity. These memorial fetishes are fashioned in secret. I don't believe this policy of allowing royal Omen to keep their horns would have come from Marika. Rather, I believe this practice started with the Omen twins, due to the wishes of Lord Godfrey. When we face him on our journey to become Elden Lord, he's holding his son in his arms and says,
It's been a long while, Morgott.
These lines are spoken with the tenderness of a parent, unconcerned with the circumstances of their child's birth. It seems as though while Marika saw Morgott as a monster, Godfrey simply saw him as his son, which leads me to believe this has always been the case, and that his sons keeping their horns and being locked away was a compromise made to ensure that they did not die during the removal process. This rule would then be extended to other royals whose children were cursed from birth to live as Omen. So the Omen twins came of age below the surface of Lanedale in the subterranean shunning grounds. However, it would seem they were given purpose while relegated to this dark place. We can face a projection of Mohg the Omen in the Cathedral of the Forsaken, and just past him is the entrance to the Frenzied Flame prescription, where a Tarnished can take the Frenzied Flame for themselves. Mohg's shackle tells us it is a fetish bathed in golden magic. Shackles were used to bind the accursed people called the Omen, and these ones were made to keep a particular Omen under strictest confinement. Though faint, the shackles still retained vestiges of power, enough to trap the once bound Mohg on Earth, if only for a short time. Knowing that Mohg was shackled to the shunning grounds leads me to believe that this was the purpose given to him by his parents. Mohg was to keep any who were seeking it away from the Three Fingers. Upon finding his new destiny, he left a projection of himself to defend the cathedral, either due to a sense of duty or, more likely, so that none would suspect he was not at his post. This is all well and good for Mohg, but when it comes to Morgott, his purpose was more ambiguous. Perhaps he was meant to defend that place with his brother, as if we find our way there before facing Morgott in battle, a barrier will stand in our way, saying, "Sealed by Morgott, the Grace-Given." But the events transpiring above his home in the shunning grounds led Morgott to a new destiny, becoming the last king of Lanedale. After the shattering, chaos spread through the land. Each of Morgott's brothers and sisters had their own ambitions, seeking to defile the Golden Order with their own ideas as to how the land should be ruled. And with the first son of Marika slain, Morgott stepped up to become the new defender of Lanedale and the Erdtree. The remembrance of the Omen King tells us, though born one of the graceless Omen, Morgott took it upon himself to become the Erdtree's protector. He loved not in return, for he was never loved, but nevertheless, love it he did. Morgott knew that none in Lanedale would follow the words of an Omen, and so he became, as Gideon Ofnir referred to him, a veiled monarch, claiming parentage to Marika herself. In order to use his fearsome strength in defense of the Erdtree, he created Margit, the Fell Omen, a projection of himself, wielding a portion of his power, that would defend Lanedale from intruders. Where Morgott's love of the Erdtree comes from we can't know for sure, as he had only known persecution at the hands of his own family, but the talisman pouch dropped by Margit the Fell Omen gives us a clue. Small withered bag knitted by hand, bestowed upon the ruling lord, or those attempting to become lord, by the elderly finger reader. As the voices of the two fingers, finger readers are said to live lives eternal, and one is even supposed to have served as a wet nurse to royalty. If we make the assumption that Morgott was gifted this talisman pouch from the finger reader that was once his wet nurse, it's possible she captivated him with stories of the two fingers and grace, convincing a young Morgott of its benevolence. So it was that the Omen King felled countless opponents, which I'm sure included many Tarnished before we found our way to the lands between. There is a sword monument that describes Morgott's achievements. The second defense of Lanedale, the Fell Omen stacks high the corpses of heroes, yet the Erdtree remains unshaken. And in the intro to Elden Ring, we can see Morgott masquerading as Margit, stabbing a man who looks like a young Radahn in the shoulder as a battle rages at the capital. The Fell Omen cloak even tells us, having slaughtered countless champions during the Shattering, the Fell Omen has become a horror to those who harbor ambitions for the Erdtree, or for lordship. No matter the odds he faced, all through the many years after the Shattering, Morgott defended Lanedale and the Erdtree. He even had his own elite force, the Knights Cavalry, that would weed out threats to the city on his behalf. Their armor tells us it is pitch-black armor thinly painted with dried blood, worn by the Knights Cavalry who ride funeral steeds. The Knights Cavalry who now wander the dim roads at night were once led by the Fell Omen, and were deliverers of death for great warriors, knights, and champions. Still, after everything Morgoth gave to protect the integrity of the Golden Order, he was rejected by the Erdtree. After defeating him, he tells us,
"Tarnished, thou art but a fool. The Erdtree wards off all who deign approach. We are all forsaken. None may claim the title of Elden Lord. Thy deeds shall be met with failure, just as I."
Given this bit of insight, it looks as if Morgoth did all of this hoping to rise above his blood as an omen. And in the end, he never could, even after sealing it within his blade. The Erdtree was never going to accept one touched by the Crucible as the new Elden Lord. Interestingly, while Marika and the Elden Beast could never accept Morgoth, his father and the very rune he wielded saw his potential. A great rune of the Shardbearer Morgoth. This great rune is the anchor ring that houses the base, and proves two things: that the Omen King was born of the Golden lineage, and that he was indeed the Lord of Leyndell. While he never ascended to the throne, and even saw himself sustain upon it, Morgoth's great rune saw the truth of things. This twisted omen, born a demigod, was the sturdy center that held the Golden Order together, unlike his twin brother, who turned his back on his family. Mohg was born into the same pits as his brother, but unlike Morgoth, he did not revere the family that shunned him. Mohg instead stewed in the fetid depths, his omen blood boiling with hatred, until one day he was approached by the Formless Mother, and was set on a new path. The incantation Blood Boon tells us it is a sacred incantation of Mohg, Lord of Blood. Thrust arm into the body of the Formless Mother, then scatter the blood flame to set the area ablaze. The Mother of Truth craves wounds. When Mohg stood before her, deep underground, his accursed blood erupted with fire, and besotted with the defilement that he was born into. The question here is, how did Mohg come to commune with the Formless Mother at all? The power of outer gods besides the Greater Will has dwindled over time in the lands between, but perhaps his weapon holds the key. Mohgwyn's sacred spear is described as the Trident of Mohg, Lord of Blood, a sacred spear that will come to symbolize his dynasty. As well as serving as a weapon, it is an instrument of communion with an outer god, who bestows power upon accursed blood. The Mother of Truth desires a wound. It may just be that while exploring the depths of the subterranean shunning grounds, Mohg happened upon this spear, and in doing so, found a connection to the Formless Mother, which would go on to change his very destiny. If you subscribe to the theory that the Formless Mother and the Bloodstar are one and the same, there's also the possibility that he encountered her once his omen horn twisted into his own eye, creating a blindness that would allow him to see the Blood Star. For more information on this idea, you can check out our video on Thorn Sorceries and the Blood Star. From here, Mohg would abandon his post, defending the Cathedral of the Forsaken, leaving to find his own destiny. But if he were to become Lord, he would need a consort. So it was that Mohg somehow, presumably through his blood portals, abducted Miquella, cocoon and all, in order to feed him blood from his pits, so that he may awaken a fully grown demigod. There is a bit of confusion here, as the intro to Elden Ring shows Mohg having removed Miquella from his cocoon. However, in-game we see where the cocoon was removed from the Haligtree, and it seems Miquella, or at least someone, resides within it in Mohg's temple. I'm willing to bet that the image of Mohg absconding with Miquella is not meant to be taken literally, as it makes more sense that he took the entire cocoon back to his dynasty. After all, it's not as if Mikola could re-cocoon himself in his sleep. Mohg would go on to recruit others to his cause, offering power from his accursed blood, and White Mask Vare was the only one of his kind to truly master this blood. The War Surgeon gown is described as a blood-stained white gown of the War Surgeons, who were effectively mercy killers. Of the surgeons that were abducted by the Lord of Blood, none were able to tame the accursed blood, none but Vare, that is, though he was an exception. Given that there's another White Mask Surgeon who wields the Swarm of Flies incantation, we think it fair to assume that person failed to tame the blood granted to him. This explains why he doesn't engage in conversation with us like Vare. From here, Vare helped Mohg to recruit bloody fingers that would slay Tarnished across the land, helping to fill Mohg's blood pits. It seems he continued to grow his forces by sharing his blood with more and more people, creating a blood-infused second-generation Albinauric variant, and the Sanguine Nobles, who someday hoped to claim their new noble rank when the Mohgwyn dynasty came to fruition. Mohg believed his glorious dynasty could not come to pass until the resurrection of his stepbrother, as the Lord of Blood's exaltation tells us. Render up your offerings to your lord, drench my consort's chamber, slake his cocoon's thirst. His awakening shall herald the dawn of our dynasty. The remembrance of the Bloodlord also lays out Mohg's failure on this front, telling us, wishing to raise Mikola to full godhood, Mohg wished to become his consort, taking the role of monarch, but no matter how much of his bloody bedchamber he tried to share, he received no response from the young Empyrean. It's possible he received no response from Mikola due to him divesting himself from his flesh in order to reach the Land of Shadow, or it may be that Mikola was never the person in the cocoon to begin with. Either way, Mohg's dynasty could never truly begin, as we find our way to his palace and cut him down before he can make his play against the Golden Order and the Erdtree. The great rune we receive upon his death shows us just how far he strayed from his birthright, as it is soaked in the blood of the Formless Mother. A great rune of the Shard-bearer Mohg. Its blessing grants a blessing of blood to summon phantoms, and imparts a phantom great rune upon successful invasion. Mohg and Morgott are twin brothers, and their great runes are naturally similar. But Mohg's rune is soaked in accursed blood, from his devout love for the wretched mire that he was born into, far below the earth. Rather than putting his faith in a religion and heritage that shunned his existence, Mohg turned his blind eye towards his parents and their Golden Order, instead embracing the blood that gave him power, and the mother who took him in her arms, asking only in return for wounds. Thank you for joining us for the stories of the Omen twins, Morgott and Mohg. Did we miss any important details you think are worth mentioning? Why were Morgott and Mohg granted great runes if their mother wanted nothing to do with them? Did Godfrey care for his sons? And if so, why did he not take them with him on the long march? Why did Morgott choose to protect an order that did nothing but shun him? And why exactly did Mohg need Mikola in order to raise his dynasty up from below? Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell, and set notifications to all so you never miss out on any of our lore dives. We look forward to seeing you again for more Elden lore. As we've continued to study the lore of each conspectus within Raya Lucaria Academy, we knew that we'd eventually have to tackle the topic of the Academy's leader. While it seems the Academy was once run by its founders, Azor and Lusat, by the time we reach the Lands Between, this is nothing but a bygone era in history. When we make our way through this institution's hallowed halls, we see portraits of the various conspectus leaders, but the largest painted visage we can find is that of Rennala, the Full Moon Witch, leader of Raya Lucaria. Today, we will be exploring the life of Renala, from her upbringing in the mountains far to the north of Lanedell, to her establishing the Carian royal family, and finally, her fate as a broken woman, consumed by the sorrow of her husband's betrayal, and the rune of the unborn. We will not be exploring any of the larger implications of her lore, simply following her timeline so we can better understand who Renala truly was. The story of Renala begins not at the Academy of Raya Lucaria, but deep in the snowy mountains of the consecrated snowfield. The Stargazer heirloom tells us about the early life of the Full Moon Queen, back when she was only a child. A talisman engraved with the legend of a queen. The young astrologer gazed at the night sky as she walked. She had always chased the stars every step of her journey. Then she met the full moon, and in time, the astrologer became a queen. We know that the astrologers made their home to the north due to the Sword of Night and Flame. Astrologers, who preceded the sorcerers, established themselves in mountaintops that nearly touched the sky, and considered the fire giants their neighbors. This means that the astrologers lived alongside not only the fire giants, but also trolls. It is thought that due to the sorcery founding Reign of Stars, stating that it may have been the founding glintstone sorcery, that the astrologers at some point made a pilgrimage to the south, eventually becoming those we know as glintstone sorcerers. But it seems that Renala and her family may not have followed this path. You could argue that Renala found her moon while living in the lands between, but we think this is unlikely, as the spell tells us. Queen Renala encountered the enchanting moon when she was young, and later, it would bewitch the Academy. The only other mention we have of Renala being young aside from this sorcery and the talisman come from Great Blade Phalanx, which tells us it is one of the sorceries of the Carian royal family, creates a defensive arc of larger magic glint blades overhead, which automatically attack nearby foes. Used by the enchanted troll knights, they were the comrades of the young Renala, bound by oath. So if Renala established an oath with the trolls and founded her full moon while she was still a young astrologer, it would make sense that she was still living up north, and didn't make her way to the south until she was an established sorcerer, ready to present her new findings to the Academy of Raya Lucaria. Upon reaching Liurnia and procuring an audience with the Conspectus leaders, Renala was able to impress them with her mastery of a new form of sorcery. The Remembrance of the Full Moon Queen tells this story. Remembrance of Renala, Queen of the Full Moon, hewn into the Erd Tree. In her youth, Renala was a prominent champion who charmed the Academy with her lunar magic, becoming its master. She also led the Glintstone Knights and established the House of Caria as royalty. Lunar magic was something wholly new to Raya Lucaria, and in discovering something that had never been seen before, Renala solidified her place as their new leader. At this time, we think it's safe to assume there were only two established Grand Masters leading the study into glintstone sorcery, Azor and Lusat, as no other Conspectus leader was ever granted the title of Grand Master. In fact, it's even possible that the concept of a Conspectus was created after Renala rose to prominence in the Academy. Renala established herself as a powerful sorcerer with some form of deeper knowledge than anyone who had come before her, and as such, her family was granted the status of royalty. This was long before she came to meet her future husband, Radagon, and there is certainly a lost bit of history here, as we believe it's possible she had children with someone else before the demigods were born. The Carian filigreed crest drops an important but obscure bit of lore in its item description. A talisman adorned with the royal crest lowers FP consumption by skills, an honor said to have once been awarded to Carian knights who served as direct retainers to the kingdom's princesses. Now there is only one princess, Rani, daughter of Renala. So if the Carians were not established as royalty until after Renala sat at the head of the Academy, and she established the Carian Knights, then there must have been princesses before Ranni the Witch, and each had their own Carian Knight to watch over them. This presents an interesting possibility for the origins of various characters. Perhaps her sweetings, the juvenile scholars, were once her literal daughters or nieces, and she births them anew, over and over again, to prevent the deaths of these children. There is also a possibility that another well-established sorcerer may actually be the illegitimate child of Renala, the Graven Witch, Selin. This theory may seem as if it comes out of left field, but let's consider a few things about the connection between these two characters. Firstly, Selin is known as a witch, just as Renala and Ranni are. The easy explanation here is that she's simply an excellent student who excelled in her studies. But it's interesting that no one else holds this distinction outside of the royal family. Next, if we look underneath Selin's crown, she does bear a passing resemblance to Renala, with dark black hair and pale skin, though not as pale as the Lunar Queen. Lastly, we know that Selin was imprisoned by the royal family for trying to restore the primeval current of glintstone sorcery by creating graven masses. But the question is, why was she merely imprisoned? You could argue that true death is not possible in the lands between, but Selin's not tarnished. She would not be revived if killed, simply return her essence to the Erdtree. This theory puts forward that Selin could not be killed because as a member of the Carian royal family, even if she forsook that name for her own studies, her fate could not be set in motion until after Radahn is defeated and the stars released. After all, Witch Hunter Jaren doesn't fulfill his duty of killing Selin until after the end of the Radahn festival. This theory admittedly hinges on circumstantial evidence, but if we lay all the pieces out, it looks as if Renala could have had children before her marriage to Radagon, and it does seem like a distinct possibility that Selin may have been a member of the Carian royal family, who cast aside her status in order to pursue the goals of her instructors rather than her mother. This would also explain why Selin does not simply kill Renala when she takes over her study, but instead moves her to the shadows. Perhaps matricide is a step too far for the Graven Witch. Like any theory, take it with a grain of salt, but it's worth considering. There seems to have been a time of peace where Renala led the Academy, and it's during this time that we believe the concept of a conspectus was created. Various schools that study different forms of glintstone sorceries. Azor and Lusat already had their fields when Renala came to power, but we believe the Haima, Lazuli, and Twin Sage were all established after she was made leader of the Academy. We also believe it was during this time that Renala outlawed the study of the primeval current, not because it threatened her power, but because she saw the horrors that lay beyond. For a time, the pursuit of knowledge into glintstone flourished, but this would not last, as Marika made a rash decision to march against the Academy, and start not one, but 2 wars. The incantation Barrier of Gold tells us this incantation was used by the champions of the Erdtree in the First and the Second Liurnian Wars, during which the red-haired Radagon joined the heroes' ranks. It would seem the champions of the Erdtree could not defeat the Academy during the First War, likely due to the strength of their sorcerers as well as the strength of the trolls bound to Renala by oath. And it seems the second was no different until a proposition was made. Muriel, the Pastor of Vows, mentions this war in passing when telling us about Lord Radagon.
You wish to know more of Lord Radagon? Lord Radagon was a great champion, possessed of flowing red locks. He came to these lands at the head of a great golden host. When he met Lady Renala in battle, he soon repented his territorial aggressions there, and became husband to the Carian queen. However, when Godfrey, first Elden Lord, was hounded from the lands between, Radagon left Renala to return to the Erdtree capital, becoming Queen Marika's second husband and king consort, taking the title of second Elden Lord. The mystery endures to this day as to why Lord Radagon would cast Lady Renala aside, and moreover, why a mere champion would be chosen for the seat of Elden Lord.
During the Second Liurnian War, these two armies were well matched, and the only way to end the bloodshed on both sides was to strike a peace accord. Radagon would cleanse himself in celestial dew, repenting his territorial aggressions, swearing love to Renala, and solidifying their marriage. Through this, the fates of the Erdtree and the Moon were conjoined, but the fate of Renala herself was sealed. During their marriage, Renala and Radagon had 3 children, Radahn, Rykard, and Ranni, all of whom would eventually be given the status of demigod. Radagon's icon tells us that, as the husband of Renala of Caria, the red-haired Radagon studied sorcery, so we think it's fair to assume that as the most powerful sorcerer in the world and head of the Academy, he was tutored by Renala herself. The two grew close enough for Renala to give her heart to Radagon. They built a family, raised children, and studied the secrets of the cosmos together. That is, until Queen Marika exiled Godfrey and called on Radagon to be the next Elden Lord. Whether you believe Marika and Radagon were 2 separate entities at one point, or that Radagon was simply a disguise for Marika, his leaving Renala broke her deeply. The Queen's robe tells us, when Renala, head of both the Academy of Raya Lucaria and the Carian royal family, lost her husband Radagon, her heart went along with him. And then, those at the Academy realized that Renala was no champion after all. When he left her, Radagon bequeathed both the amber egg which housed the rune of the unborn and his red wolf to his wife. There's much debate over why he did this. Personally, I believe the amber egg was always meant to keep Renala transfixed and weaken the Academy by essentially nullifying the strongest sorcerer in the world, and it did just that. Renala became obsessed with the amber egg, and we can learn more about this time in her life from Muriel.
Wish to know more of Lady Renala? She is Queen, head of the Carian royal family, and governor of the Academy of Raya Lucaria, the great and beautiful full moon witch. Sadly, her heart was broken when Lord Radagon left her, and then, when the Academy rebelled against the royals, she was locked away in the Grand Library. In the end, Lady Renala was left alone, cradling the amber egg Lord Radagon bequeathed her. Now she devotes herself to it through forbidden rite, the grim art of reincarnation. You would do well to remember, severing a vow, strongest of bonds, has consequences ever more dire.
So it would seem that the Conspectus leaders had Renala locked in her study to forever practice her reincarnation rituals, now nothing more than a figurehead, while they controlled the Academy. This would embolden them to set their forces against the Carian royal family, but in truth, Renala would play no part in that story. Renala spent her days in the Grand Library, rebirthing those known as the juvenile scholars. Their clothes are described as a robe worn by young Academy scholars. The juveniles birthed anew by the amber egg of Queen Renala, the head of Raya Lucaria Academy. Yet their birth is not without imperfections, and thus did they repeat the process, eventually becoming utterly dependent upon it. Rebirth is as sleep to them, and with each awakening, memory fades into oblivion. Who these scholars were, they can no longer remember. It is lost to the sheer number of rebirths they've endured. Of course, the reason they need to be reborn again and again is that without holding the rune of the unborn, they will die soon after their rebirth, as illustrated by the death of Bach if we send him to Renala to be reborn as a human. The rune of the unborn tells us it perfects those who have been born anew. Children born anew by Renala are all frail and short-lived, imperfect beings each and all. So as the holder of the rune, our Tarnished is the only being capable of being properly reborn. Whether or not Rennala understands this is up for debate. Upon her imprisonment, the Full Moon Queen has been largely left alone by the Academy as a whole. She's not to be disturbed, as there is a rolling ball trap impeding anyone who wishes to reach her, and just outside the lift to her chamber stands a Carian knight, ready to defend his queen to his last breath. As a final line of defense to protect the now bewitched Carian queen, her loyal daughter, Ranni the Witch, has set up an enchantment, so that any who wish to cause her harm will not simply face this sorcerer at her weakest, but will instead be forced to contend with the true majesty of the Full Moon Queen, conjured by the demigod witch who called her mother. In this battle, we see the true mastery Rennala had over glintstone and Carian sorcery, the devastating power she once wielded, and it makes the lowly state she now finds herself in even sadder. This is where the story of Rennala, head of the Carian royal family, ends for now. She sits in her chambers, forever ready to rebirth our Tarnished anew if we so choose. The once great and powerful Queen of Caria is now nothing more than a broken husk, who had her mind and heart twisted by a man who cared only for perfecting himself and his order. Rennala's fate, just as all other Carians, should be tied to the stars. So now that they're in motion once again, who's to say there's no hope for her after we become Elden Lord? Perhaps now we can find a way to break the Amber Egg's hold over her, so she can once again rise to prominence, and reclaim her place as head of Raya Lucaria. However, these are possibilities we may never know the answer to, as now, even after we take the throne, Rennala sits in her study, bewitched by the gift of her former husband. Thank you for joining us for this breakdown of the life of Rennala, leader of Raya Lucaria, the Full Moon Witch and Queen of the Carian royal family. What did you think of our timeline of Rennala's history? Did we miss any events you think were worth discussing? Could Selen have been a Carian princess who cast aside her name in pursuit of the primeval current? Did Radagon always intend to betray Rennala? Will the Carian Queen ever reclaim her former glory? Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss out on any of our lore dives. We look forward to seeing you again for more Elden Lore. It's easy to forget that when we meet the demigods still present in the lands between, they are long past their prime. The glory of who they were both before and during the Shattering has been lost to the ages. Ranni is a soul housed by a puppet, her body crumbled by death itself. Godwyn is a soulless corpse, spreading death across the land. Radahn is a nearly mindless monster, fixated on battle and still holding back the stars. Godric is a mess of body parts stolen from others. Malenia has succumbed more and more to the rot over the years, and Rykard is now a hideous amalgamation of man and serpent. While it's hard to picture what these demigods may have looked like long ago, we can actually see images of Praetor Rykard, and through the lore associated with his consort, Tanith, we gain insight into the man he was, as well as their story. Today we will be taking a look at the past of Praetor Rykard, as well as his relationship with Lady Tanith of the Volcano Manor, and explore his downfall as he turned to blasphemy in a bid for power. Praetor Rykard, the man who had come to overtake the flesh of the god-devouring serpent, once sat amongst his demigod siblings at the foot of the Erd Tree. His title, Praetor, implies that he once held a place as a kind of judge, possibly the highest the Golden Order had, and it would make sense that between his inquisitors and the shaded castle being found below Mount Gelmir, that he likely once upheld the law across the lands between. Gideon Ofnir also refers to him as a Justicar, or an administrator of justice, so he likely had the final say in sentencing for any crimes deemed heinous enough to be brought to his attention. All of this is to say that Rykard likely prosecuted many who committed blasphemy against the Golden Order, having his inquisitors torture them for a confession, and ultimately handing down their death sentence to be served at the Shaded Castle. Given that his father Radagon served as the second Elden Lord, and was himself a Golden Order fundamentalist, it makes sense that he would have groomed his son for this position after he married Marika, and she lifted his children to the status of demigod. However, it seemed Rykard reveled a bit too much in his work, as the tools of his inquisitors tell us. The inquisitors of Volcano Manor used horrific weapons in order to force confessions of guilt from those who were charged with crimes against the Golden Order. The Volcano Manor, Rykard's home and base of operations, lay deep within Mount Gelmir, and as such, Rykard became privy to the secrets that lay within that mountain, not the least of which were ways to use the fires that bellowed below to enhance his weaponry. The Inquisitor's Girandol is described as an instrument of torture used on nobles behind the curtain at the Volcano Manor of Mount Gelmir. Its numerous spikes pierce the flesh, then singe the wounds with flame. The smell of burnt blood induces despair in the victim, a candlestick conceived by a thorough mind. Multiple Gelmir sorceries tell us, after discovering the ancient hexes of Gelmir, Rykard, son of Queen Renala, brought them back into practical use as new forms of sorcery. We can see how Rykard used the land he called home in order to grow his strength. But of course, this was all in service to the Golden Order, right? It would seem that Rykard also indulged in travel outside of the Lands Between whenever his judiciary schedule allowed, and on one of these journeys, he encountered the woman he would come to cherish above all others. This woman danced in a way that transfixed Praetor Rykard. As her castanets describe, the passionate dance comprises no seductiveness, but merely a dignified beauty. It was not seductiveness that charmed Rykard and brought him under her spell, rather a dignity that he had not encountered before, and he decided then and there to bring this woman, Tanith, back with him to the Lands Between, in order to become the Lady of Volcano Manor, and his consort. The consort's mask is described as the mask worn by Tanith, Lady of the Volcano Manor, in the image of a foreign queen. Long ago, when Rykard first set eyes on Tanith, she was working as a dancer in a foreign land. Soon, he made her his consort. She was the only human to remain by his side when he became the Serpent of Blasphemy. In that moment, Tanith was truly charmed by him. We'll discuss a bit more about how she stood by his side later. At some point during his tenure as Praetor, Rykard discovered the rituals of those who came before the Golden Order, the original inhabitants of Mount Gelmir. They seemed to worship a serpent and offered up sacrifices to this deity using serpent-like weapons. At this point, I believe his research was merely academic. All he learned was for the benefit of the Golden Order. He grew in knowledge and strength in order to better perform his duties. But then something changed. Rykard's sister, Ranni, was conducting a plan to divest herself of her Empyrean flesh and control her own fate, and she needed her brother's help. This likely put Rykard in a difficult position. Should his loyalties lay with his station or with his family? And in this case, Rykard chose family. We do not know exactly how he assisted in the Night of Black Knives, but the Blasphemous Claw tells us it was his reward for doing so. A slab of rock engraved with traces of the Rune of Death can deflect the power of the Black Blade. On the night of the dire plot, Ranni rewarded Praetor Rykard with these traces. Should the coming trespass one day transpire, they would serve as a last resort foil, allowing Rykard to challenge Malekith the Black Blade, the Black Beast of destined death. This may have been his first taste of blasphemy, and there was so much more to come. When we speak to Lady Tanith about the motivations of her lord, she tells us how Rykard responded to the shattering and the will of the Two Fingers.
Tarnished were forced to scavenge, squabbling for crumbs.
Like the Shard-bearers vying for power in the wake of the Shattering, our Lord, indignant, has refused to scurry about, fighting over what miserly scraps they allow us. If the Erd Tree, and indeed the very gods, would debase us so, then we are willing to raise the banner of resistance, even if it means heresy.
So it was that Praetor Rykard turned his back on the Golden Order, and instead built up his own forces, founding the Recusants, preparing for war not to take the Elden Throne, but to supplant it altogether. It was during this time that the forces of Leyndell caught wind of Rykard's intentions, leading to their march on Mount Gelmir, to a battle that no one would win. A sword monument tells the story of this siege. The assault on Volcano Manor, the squalid, the sick, the blasphemous. A wretched, unending war with no glory. None walked away from this fight unscathed, and it was after this that Rykard saw that no matter how much knowledge and power he amassed, it would not be enough to stand against the capital. The only way to take the land from the Greater Will was to indulge in blasphemy. Rykard, knowing the implications of what he was about to do, offered his love, the Lady Tanith, a way out. He handed her a tonic of forgetfulness. She could take it, leave the lands between, forget all about these wars, and not have to live with the knowledge that Rykard was about to debase himself for power. But she refused this gift. The tonic is described as a gift bestowed by Rykard, sworn to blasphemy, to Lady Tanith, who unfortunately had no use for it. My lord, there could be no greater distress than to forget you. His love for her offered a second chance at happiness, and her love for him showed that she did not need it. Presumably, after this, the time came for Rykard to make his way to the location of the Great Serpent, the deity once revered by the inhabitants of Mount Gelmir. According to the Remembrance of the Blasphemous, Rykard said, "I understand. The road to blasphemy is long and perilous. One cannot walk it unprepared to sin." Once face to face with this serpent, Rykard allowed it to devour him, so that they may become one. And through the power of his great rune, Rykard remained in control, at least to some extent. A great rune of the Shard-bearer Rykard. Rykard was amongst the children of Rennala and Radagon, who became demigod stepchildren after Radagon's union with Queen Marika. But Rykard fed himself to the blasphemous serpent, great rune and all. We can assume Lady Tanith, as well as many of his men, followed along for this journey. And after he fed himself to the serpent, she fell even more deeply in love with her lord. The Devourer's Scepter also tells us about Rykard's final moments, before he became one with this deity. Scepter in the shape of a serpent devouring the world. This weapon will one day become the very symbol of the Lord of Blasphemy. A vision of the future briefly seen by Rykard in his final moments, before being devoured by the Great Serpent. From here, Rykard began to grow in power as he devoured the strong, making them part of his very being. The sorcery Rancor Call depicts these events. The terrible power of Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy. These spirits manifest from the rancor of heroes who met a violent end. The Lord granted them an audience, whereupon they were welcomed by the maw of the Great Serpent, and within the serpent's bowels, they became the Lord's kin. He would offer these heroes the opportunity to devour the gods together, and make them part of the horrible wriggling masses bursting from his flesh and clinging to his blasphemous blade. While the Recusants, led by Lady Tanith, followed unwaveringly in their lord's footsteps, his soldiers began to see cracks in his vision. The Gelmir knight armor is described as armor worn by knights once loyal to Praetor Rykard. It bears an emblem that none wear any longer, standing as it does for a lord that fell from loft ambition into gluttonous depravity. As the lord lost his dignity, so too did these knights lose their master. They felt betrayed by how far the blasphemy had gone. To them, their lord was no longer seeking to break a vicious cycle, but instead starting one of his own. To that end, they set out in search of a weapon to end the life of the creature they had once considered their worthy lord, the Serpent Hunter. Weapon that serves as both great sword and spear, thought to have been used to hunt an immortal great serpent in the distant past. It manifests a long blade of light when facing such a creature. When their master's heroic aspirations degenerated into mere greed, his men searched for a weapon with which they might halt their lord. As we see upon entering his chambers, rather than be accepted into the maw of the serpent, these knights were burned to a crisp, leaving naught behind but the weapon meant to slay Rykard. This is where we find the Lord of Blasphemy once we reach the Lands Between. The recusants continue their quest with Lady Tanith leading the charge. They slay those who would follow the Golden Order. They take strength for themselves, so that they may one day give it to their Lord, who will rise above the greater will. They believe in blasphemy and work to bring Praetor Rykard's ambitions to fruition. After we defeat Rykard, there's no ill will toward our Tarnished. Bernal takes up the mantle in order to finish what the Volcano Manor started, and Tanith tells us this should be the way of things, the strong devouring the weak. However, this is only a half-truth for the Lady of Volcano Manor. The love story of these two does not end with Rykard's death. It lives on, as we can find Tanith devouring the corpse of her lord, begging for him to find purchase within her.
You... allow me some time. Our lord's carcass is vast, and not easily consumed. Dear Rykard, please, find purchase within me. I wish to be your serpent, your family. One day, let us devour the gods together.
She still believes in their family, the serpents they created, the house they made a home, the recusants they took in, and the dream of Rykard, the Lord of Blasphemy. Thank you for joining us for this week's dive into the history of Praetor Rykard and Lady Tanith, leader of the recusants. What did you think of this lore breakdown? Is Raya the true daughter of Rykard, created through serpent rituals? Did he know that he would control the serpent when it devoured him? Or was this a gamble on Rykard's part? Why isn't there a blasphemous ending where we set the Lands Between free from the Elden Ring without burning it all to the ground? Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell, and set notifications to all so you never miss out on any of our lore dives. We look forward to seeing you again for more Elden lore. Miquella's promised consort was a pretty big twist for those of us following the lore of Elden Ring. Many assumed the demigod who would have the closest relationship to Miquella outside of Melania would have been Godwyn, as we came to understand that one of Miquella's goals was to give his brother a proper death, putting his body to rest after his soul was destroyed. This previously untouched-on relationship between Miquella and Radahn ends up changing what we thought the course of this DLC would be, and even adds context to the battle between Radahn and Melania, a clash which we were never given enough information to understand the motivation behind, outside of, it was the Shattering and the demigods were warring. While ultimately, Miquella saw Radahn as a model of knighthood, the man most fitting to sit at his side as he ushered in an age of compassion. I believe the only reason the young lion was chosen was due to Miquella's childish hero worship of his brother, much in the same way Radahn looked up to Godfrey. Today, we're going to discuss the promised consort, and why he was chosen to help bring Miquella's dreams to life. The remembrance of a god and lord tells us, Miquella saw in Radahn a lord, his strength and his kindness, that stood in stark contrast with their afflicted selves. And so Miquella made his heartfelt wish, that Radahn would one day be his king consort. We can see this wish for ourselves after defeating the duo.
Lord brother, I'm going to be a god. If we honor our part of the vow, promise me you'll be my consort.
There's a lot to unpack here, and we'll start with the way Miquella viewed Radahn, as you could argue it mirrors how Radahn saw the first Elden Lord, Godfrey. Miquella seems to see Radahn in the same way much of the Elden Ring fandom does, as a paragon of virtue and a true warrior in the purest sense. But he also considers his brother to be kind, a side of Radahn that wasn't explored before Shadow of the Erdtree. Through this lens, we can recontextualize some of Radahn's actions through the history of the Lands Between. He clearly respected cultures outside of his own, likely due to being both of Carian and Erdtree descent. He learned the mysteries of gravity sorcery from the Alabaster Lords in order to protect Celia, and befriended an Albinoric who studied alongside him, coming to form a brotherly bond with Gaius, someone his own family likely would have seen as inferior. He used his mastery of gravity sorcery to ensure that he would never be without his closest animal companion, Leonard, and he held back the stars themselves, knowing that it would cause his own fate, and that of his family, to be held in place, because he wanted to keep the people of the Lands Between safe from the monstrosities that litter the cosmos. In Miquella's eyes, these were all acts of a man who believed in kindness as strength, a man who sought the throne of the Elden Lord in order to be a virtuous ruler. But it's possible this was simply a naive, childish way to view Radahn. Redmane Freya speaks on Radahn multiple times through her questline, even going as far as to say war suited him best, rather than dying through the festival he was promised by Jaren. If the rest of the Redmane shared this sentiment, it's likely he was seen by his own troops as a man of action and war, rather than a ruler interested in creating a kinder world. His march against the capital city was a clear bid for power, and if Radahn truly was this paragon of virtue, fit to create a new age, then I sincerely doubt that Morgott would have stopped him from ascending to the throne. If we look at Radahn through the lens of the man he molded himself after, we can understand the great legacy he felt he needed to live up to. Radahn's lion armor tells us, the golden lion is said to symbolize Godfrey, the Elden Lord, and his beast regent, Sarosh. From his youngest years, Radahn was naturally captivated by the Lord of the battlefield. Radahn modeled himself in the image of his hero, the fearsome warrior and first Elden Lord to Queen Marika, which may mean his pursuit of strength was first and foremost an attempt to become like the man who brought the entire Lands Between under one rule. His helm goes on to further explain how Radahn saw himself during his days on the battlefield. Radahn inherited the furious flaming red hair of his father Radagon, and is fond of its heroic implications. I was born a champion's cub, but I am the lord of the battlefield's lion. Radahn saw himself as a lion, the very symbol of Godfrey's rule, and it's not unreasonable to assume his goal was to unite the Lands Between after the Shattering through force, rather than diplomacy. That's what makes his vow to Miquella compelling. I believe he never intended to keep it without a fight. Rather, it was part of a death pact, much like he made with his friend and general, Jaren. Miquella's dialogue tells us that he and someone else have a part to play in the pact with Radahn, specifically when he says, if we honor our part of the vow, promise me you'll be my consort. I believe this use of our is referring to Miquella and Melania, fulfilling a sort of duty to Radahn. Witch Hunter Jaren's eccentric armor tells us, Jaren preferred a nomadic existence, but after spending time as a guest of the Carian royals, he became a guest commander for General Radahn, and for the first time, the restless tumbleweed would be bound by honorable oath, and his hood tells us this was an oath of honorable death. We help Jaren to fulfill his oath by defeating what is left of Starscourge Radahn as we make our way through the Lands Between. And it got me thinking, perhaps the vow made by Miquella to Radahn was one of honorable death, just as he had with Jaren. Depending on your opinion of Radahn, you can assume he would never be content with a world of kindness and peace, as he longed to be the strongest on the battlefield. However, that need to prove himself could be his reason for agreeing to become Miquella's consort. What if Miquella and Radahn made a vow that when Malenia came for Radahn's life, they would battle to the death, and if Malenia won, Radahn would become Miquella's consort? The young lion's helm tells us it is the golden helm worn by Radahn in his younger years, proudly displaying his heroic red hair. It is fitting attire for a lion. When Malenia, blade of Miquella, let the wrought flower blossom in Aeonia, Radahn heard a murmur in his ear. Miquella awaits thee, O promised consort. This gives us a reason why Malenia was so comfortable with essentially using chemical warfare against Radahn. In order for her brother's new rule to come to fruition, Radahn had to die at any cost. After all, what is the cost of peace and an age of compassion? What are the lives of Caelid when weighed against the lives of all those in the Lands Between? Unfortunately for Malenia, even her bloom was not enough to defeat the Starscourge. However, it was enough to weaken him to the point where we can put an end to the mindless creature she left behind, and Miquella could repurpose his spirit by using the body of Luminary Mohg. When ruminating on the promised consort and Miquella's true plans, I think we look at the story of Godwyn the Golden with new context. Clearly, while they likely had a good relationship, Godwyn did not live up to Miquella's expectations of what it meant to be the promised consort to the Age of Compassion. If you've watched our video on Godwyn, you know that I theorize he was not the paragon of virtue many assume him to be. Yes, he made peace with the dragons and was regarded as a hero, but when following the story of his descendant, Godric, and that of Kenneth Haight, it seems as though Godwyn may have used his station to be somewhat of a philanderer in the Lands Between, diluting the golden lineage by having children with common folk. With this in mind, and the knowledge that Miquella needed a vessel for his promised consort, I believe Miquella had a hand in the Night of Black Knives, and that Godwyn's body was his first choice for housing the soul of Radahn. We know Miquella and Ranni had some kind of relationship, due to her recognizing Torrent upon our first meeting, and the strongly held belief that Miquella was Torrent's former master. What if Ranni was aware of Miquella's plans as well, and killing Godwyn's soul was meant to make him a vessel? No one knew that the act of leaving him soulless would putrefy his flesh and make him the Prince of Death. So perhaps this was an unexpected consequence. Ranni would also have no issue with this plan, as her fate would be set back in motion by the release of the stars. We know through the dialogue of ghosts at Castle Sol that Miquella wanted to grant Godwyn a true death. In fact, it's even said in the description of the Golden Epitaph. A sword made to commemorate the death of Godwyn the Golden, first of the demigods to die, infused with the humble prayer of a young boy. O brother, Lord brother, please die a true death. If Godwyn could die a true death, his body could be used for Radahn's spirit. But since this was impossible, Miquella had to turn to another of his blood relatives, Luminary Mohg, who ultimately had his body used to create the promised consort. So it was that the remains of Luminary Mohg were used to bring Miquella's promised consort back to life and under his spell. I believe Radahn did make this vow to Miquella, on the condition that he could be defeated in battle, which I truly believe he never expected to be. Miquella, being a child with a childish view of his knightly brother, took him at his word, and started planning to make sure Malenia could defeat Radahn, and start the series of events that would lead to his ascension as the new god of the Lands Between. It was by pure coincidence that we found our way to the Lands Between, and managed to defeat not only the rotten remains of the Starscourge, but also the luminary omen Mohg, giving Miquella all the pieces he needed to start on his path toward godhood. Mikola would have a kind lord to stand by his side, regardless of his true nature, thanks to our involvement. And the true battle for the future of the lands between would commence at the Divine Gate. Perhaps if it were possible to use Godwyn's body as a vessel for Radahn, things may have ended differently. But as it stands, I believe the omened body of Mohg was likely what gave us the edge in defeating Radahn. The strength of the promised consort is still awe-inspiring, but I don't believe it's quite as powerful as Radahn in his prime. And I believe the omen horns below his gloves, and the blood flame attacks he has access to, are proof of this. The promised consort is Mikola's idealized version of who Radahn was in life. He believes Radahn to be a peerless knight and kind soul who brought light wherever he went in the lands between. But we'll never know if that is who he truly was. In fact, we don't know if the promised consort is fighting for Mikola because he genuinely wanted to fulfill his vow, or if Mikola is simply controlling him, compelling affection in a way only he knows how. While he may be bereft of his great rune, Mikola is still able to steal our hearts as we fight him. So who's to say he isn't doing the same exact thing with the resurrected Radahn? In the end, it was a kindness when we put Radahn out of his misery the first time. And I believe it was again when we defeated the promised consort and freed his soul from the confines of Mohg's body. Mikola's childish view of his brother ultimately led to his death, another soul tossed aside in pursuit of a compassionate world. Perhaps if this compassion didn't need to be on Mikola's terms, things may have worked out differently. But as it stands, the promise is never truly fulfilled, and the world never experiences an age of compassion. Mikola, though ascending to a godlike form, never overcomes his curse, and Radahn can finally rest in peace, knowing that the same warrior granted him an honorable death not once, but twice. Thank you for listening to my findings and thoughts on the promised consort, and the questions surrounding him. Was Mikola involved in the Night of Black Knives, planning so early on for his ascension to godhood? Was Mohg always meant to be the vessel for Radahn's soul, or was Godwyn Mikola's first choice? Do you believe Radahn agreed to the terms of his vow with the caveat that he needed to be defeated in battle? Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell, and set notifications to all so you never miss out on any of our lore dives. We look forward to seeing you again for more Elden lore. Like any FromSoft title, there are so many facets of Elden Ring's story that are left up to interpretation. While we get some level of detail on every major player, their histories are often lost to time, and very few can be unearthed. While Shadow of the Erdtree revealed much about Queen Marika and her ascension to godhood, it did not do the same for any other member of her family. Even Mikola, who took center stage, had no real information about the years before he reached the Land of Shadows shared with us. There is one character in particular who I want to share my thoughts on, because his origin is so deeply steeped in mystery that even those who agree find contradictions in each other's theories. Today I'm going to tell the story of Radagon, or at least what I believe to be his story, up to the First Liurnian War and beyond. I'm certain you, the person watching this, will have your own theories and interpretations, and I want to clarify that these are mine, and should not be taken as lore written in stone. But when I look at the details of this character, this is what I see. So join me as I share my view on Radagon, where he came from, and whether or not he was always part of Marika. The early life of Radagon is hotly debated, with many believing that he spawned from Marika herself, but I don't subscribe to this idea. In an echo of Queen Marika that Melina shares with us, she says, "O Radagon, leal hound of the Golden Order, thou art yet to become me, thou art yet to become a god. Let us be shattered both, mine other self." These words of Marika can be seen to support either side of this argument. She refers to Radagon as her other self, implying they're already one. However, she also says he has yet to become her. So they are still two people, even if they're sharing a body. I believe this is meant to portray that Marika and Radagon have not always been the same person, and some evidence of this can be found in the Sacred Rite Scroll. In the Specimen Storehouse of the Shadowkeep, we come across the Sacred Rite Scroll, which outlines the ritual needed to become a god. A scroll made of white tree bark. Few can decipher the scroll, which describes the secret rite of the Divine Gateway, said to be found at the tower enshrouded by shadow. A lord will usher in a god's return, and the lord's soul will require a vessel. When we look at how Miquella interpreted this ritual, all of the pieces line up perfectly. The Lord Radahn ushers in the god Miquella's return. The vessel, Mohg's body, is required for the Lord's soul to do this. However, in the trailer for Shadow of the Erdtree, we see Marika ascending to godhood at the gate, so she must have performed this ritual as well. In my estimation, that means she needed a lord and a vessel for that lord's soul in order to become a god. If Radagon is her other half, that means his soul would have been the lord's soul. Then, in order to ascend to godhood, Marika herself acted as the vessel for Radahn's soul. In this way, she is both vessel and god. This is only possible due to her shaman flesh, as it could meld harmoniously with others. I believe her malleable flesh made a suitable vessel for Radagon's soul, making within her a trinity of all three aspects of the ritual: Lord, vessel, and god. There are some who I've seen try to refute this point by claiming that Godfrey was the first Elden Lord, so it stands to reason that Radagon could play no part in the ritual. And to that I say, Radagon could not have been the first Elden Lord, as his merger with Marika was likely not common knowledge. The two existed within one body, and before Marika took control of the lands between, she needed someone who could lead the fight alongside her, and Hoarah of the Badlands was the right warrior for the job. Marika had not yet considered the idea of allowing Radagon to act as Elden Lord, but she likely did allow their union to bear fruit, as sometime between Marika's ascension and her marriage to Godfrey, Messmer and Melina were born. Radagon and Marika's first children were most likely Messmer the Impaler and Melina, the girl who came to be burned and bodiless. Messmer's kindling tells us both he and his sister bore a vision of fire, and as it were, both were likely born cursed. Messmer's curse is clear, with the abyssal serpent living within his body, but Melina's was different. She was born a kindling maiden, making it her ultimate fate to burn the Erdtree itself. You can argue Radagon was not the father of these children, but their red hair is a trait shared by Melania and their potential parent. And the fact that they were both born cursed also speaks to the union of Marika and her other half, Radagon. Being born of a single god tended to carry with it afflictions of other outer gods. With this in mind, I believe it is possible Marika had her first two children with her other half, while he was one with her. This raises a question I don't believe there is any true answer for. Were Marika and Radagon able to exist in the same space at the same time? When Marika becomes Radagon at the end of Elden Ring, we see her golden hair turn to red, and her body take on a masculine form. When we consider this along with other evidence of their oneness, such as the statue of Radagon becoming Marika when we use the Law of Regression incantation, it leads us to think the two could not exist in the same physical space at the same time. This incantation tells us, the fundamentalists describe the Golden Order through the powers of regression and causality. Regression is the pull of meaning, that all things yearn eternally to converge. This description, in my opinion, invites doubt. All things yearn to converge. They aren't converged already. Another piece of lore that calls into question whether or not Marika and Radagon always share one body is the existence of Saint Trina. Saint Trina is the other half of Miquella and exists in her own physical form. I think it's fair to assume that Miquella and Trina once shared one body, just as Marika and Radagon. But upon casting Trina aside, Miquella was able to split her off into her own physical being. Now knowing this, we have to ask, why wouldn't Marika be able to do the same with Radagon? In the end, I don't think it's all that important whether or not Radagon had his own physical form split off from Marika, as it's indisputable that he had his own will, his own mind, and his own fierce loyalty to the Golden Order. During the time where Marika and Godfrey took control of the lands between, little was heard from Radagon. It's fair to assume he was largely absent during the entire rule of Godfrey and the banishment of the Tarnished. It's not until the Golden Order went to war with Liurnia that Radagon makes his name known in the lands between. This man would lead the Golden Order's forces against the Academy of Rey Lucaria, as their magic was seen as heresy to the Order. This was a war with no winner, where the two sides came to understand neither would gain the upper hand. This peace between the sorcerers and the Order was short-lived, as there would be a second war in Liurnia, where Radagon would lead the charge against Rennala and her forces. However, this war ended much differently from the first, not with bloodshed, but with marriage. Radagon, in an uncharacteristic moment, chose to cleanse himself of what others could have considered the sin of inciting war against the Carians, and then accepted a marriage to Rennala, his sworn enemy. The two would live a life together for some time and have 3 children, Rykard, Radahn, and their youngest, Ranni. During this time with the Carians, Radagon would study glintstone sorcery, as it was no longer considered heretical due to the marriage of the Golden Order's greatest knight to the Carian royal. However, it would seem that Radagon still had the interests of the Golden Order at heart, as he went on to order all Carian preceptors to don the mask of confidence. Mask with the mouth sewn shut with gold thread. When Radagon married Rennala, he ordered the Carian magic preceptors to don these masks, to make it clear that all of their matters were to be kept strictly private. In this way, Radagon continued serving the Golden Order, even if he was wed to Carian royalty. It's fair to assume that Radagon had no true love for Rennala, or his children with her, as we have no lore addressing his relationship with any of his children. In fact, the only one of these 3 kids who seemed to have a relationship with their parents was Ranni the Witch, who was very close with her mother Rennala. Neither Rykard nor Radahn seemed to have much to say about their father as they grew, aside from Radahn seeing his red mane as the hair of a champion. It's fair to say while he may not have had much of a relationship with his father, he certainly worshipped him alongside his other longtime hero, Elden Lord Godfrey. When it came time to leave the Carian Queen and return to Leyndell so that he could take the mantle of second Elden Lord, Radagon left safeguards in place to ensure Liurnia could not rise again. First, he bequeathed the Amber Egg to Rennala, which contained a rune of the Elden Ring. This rune would bewitch the Queen, filling her with a single-minded obsession with rebirthing her sweetings over and over again. As an extra precaution, he also left one of his red wolves to protect the road to Rennala, likely to keep anyone from breaking the spell. From Liurnia, Radagon would travel back to Leyndell and reunite with Marika so he could take his place on the throne. This story lends credence to those who believe the two were once in separate bodies, but as I've mentioned, I don't believe this detail makes much difference in the overall story. I assume that it was after returning that Radagon created the Golden Order Greatsword, which was once a symbol of his union with Rennala. Greatsword made of light, modeled after the Elden Ring itself, forged by King Consort Radagon to proudly symbolize the tenets of the Golden Order, one of the legendary armaments. Telltale signs betray that this was once the greatsword bequeathed to him by his first wife, Rennala. Presumably, not long after returning, Radagon and Marika had 2 more children, the twins Malenia and Miquella, both of whom were born cursed by other outer gods, likely due to their parents being two pieces of the same being. After rejoining Marika and Leyndell, Radagon spent his time governing and teaching his new son all he could. The incantation Triple Rings of Light produces 3 rings of light and fires them forwards. The rings of light return to a position close to the caster before disappearing. It is said to be a gift from the young Miquella to his father, Radagon. I believe this gift was given due to Radagon spending copious amounts of time with his son, teaching him all he could of gold and the stars. He was so delighted by this gift, he gave Miquella one of his own, Radagon's Rings of Light. One of the incantations of the Golden Order fundamentalists, a gift of gratitude to the young Miquella from his father, Radagon, produces a golden ring of light and fires it across a wide area. And yet, the young Miquella abandoned fundamentalism, for it could do nothing to treat Malenia as a cursed rot. This was the beginning of unalloyed gold. It is likely that Radagon unwittingly set Miquella on his path by showing him the true limits of the Golden Order's power, especially when put up against the strength of the Elden Ring itself, which was housed inside of Miquella's mother, a god. There's not much else to say about Radagon from this point forward. The next historic event he'd have any involvement in would be the Shattering. Believe what you will about Marika's motivations for destroying the Elden Ring. Perhaps she was truly a grieving mother, or maybe it was her plan all along to separate herself from the Greater Will and gain true freedom. But regardless of the reason, Marika would bring her hammer down on the Elden Ring, shattering it to pieces. Immediately after Marika shattered the ring, Radagon stepped in, doing his best to repair it, but it was impossible. The ring was destroyed, and the door to the Erd Tree was closed behind them. The Greater Will strung up Marika with a rune, and trapped Radagon within her, as insurance that any who would seek to change the ring through a mending rune would be forced to do battle with the Golden Order's most loyal soldier. There is one aspect of Radagon I want to address that doesn't fit neatly into his story or history: his red hair. Red hair seems to be associated with those afflicted by a curse, and the giant's red braid tells us every giant is red of hair, and Radagon was said to have despised his own red locks. Perhaps that was a curse of their kind. If we consider that the red hair of Radagon was a curse, the same as those afflicting his children, I think we can reasonably assume that this was a curse related to the fell god of the giants. I believe the only way that this makes sense is if Radagon was not always cursed with his red hair. Perhaps during the war with the giants, the fell god cursed Marika for wiping out his people, and that curse manifested within Radagon rather than Marika. He would understand the implication, as he already had 2 children with Marika who were born cursed and took on the red hair, which would explain his hatred. Radagon, the lord who gave his soul so that Marika could ascend to godhood, maintained a will of his own even after coming to share a body with her. He was a devout Golden Order fundamentalist who fought to spread the rule of gold across the lands between. He acted in the best interest of the Greater Will with every action he took, whether it be fighting its wars, marrying to consolidate power, siring children so that there was a selection of Empyreans for the next generation, or betraying the very god he gave everything for so that he might attempt to repair the Elden Ring. In the end, Radagon truly was a loyal hound of the Order, and his greatest mistake was forsaking his other half, because in doing so, he sealed his fate, his destruction at the hand of our Tarnished. Radagon lived a life of service and died for a god that saw him as nothing more than a weapon to point in whatever direction it saw fit. Thank you for indulging me as I shared my interpretation of the life and times of Radagon, the second Elden Lord. Do you believe Radagon existed before Marika's ascension, or is he a piece of her, possibly spawned from the Fell God's curse? Is he the father of Mesmer and Melina? Did he ever truly love Renala, Or was their marriage a sham to consolidate power? Why was he so fiercely loyal to the Elden Beast? I'm sure many watching today's video have wildly different ideas about Radagon than I've presented here, and I would love to read all of your thoughts in the comments. Watch that button light up as I say like this video, and if you think we've earned it, please subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss out on any of our lore dives. We look forward to seeing you again for more Elden lore. It was originally thought that the Knight of Black Knives was strictly Ranni's plot to free herself from her two fingers. However, the deeper you dive into the lore of Elden Ring, the clearer it becomes that she was not the only person who participated in this attack against the Golden Order. It's confirmed through item descriptions that her brother, Praetor Rykard, was aware of the plot, and may have had a hand in its execution, and many believe that Queen Marika herself may have been involved, given how easy it was for the Black Knives to both infiltrate Leyndell and steal a piece of the Rune of Death from Malekith, who slept in the Queen's chambers. I want to take this idea a step further, because in my research trying to understand the big picture in the lands between, I used to think that the buck stopped with Ranni, her brother, and possibly the Queen. However, after digging through Shadow of the Erdtree, I now believe that Miquella, the boy who wished to give his brother a true death, may have either had a hand in that same brother's demise, or allowed it to happen in order to further his own goals. In doing research for last week's video about Torrent, I dove into an idea that I had considered before but hadn't elaborated on, that Miquella was Torrent's former master, and he must have had some kind of relationship with Ranni in order for her to have been bequeathed the spirit-calling bell for the next person found to be riding Torrent. I am confident that Miquella is Torrent's former master due to the promotional image for Shadow of the Erdtree that depicts Miquella riding Torrent in the Land of Shadow. While I know many believe this could be a young Marika riding Side Saddle, and that she was Torrent's former master, I believe there are three main points that can be made which make it impossible for this to be Marika. First, the braids on the hair of this rider are a one-to-one match with the only image of Miquella we have, as well as Miquella's hair when facing the promised consort Radahn, and the braids that we've seen on Queen Marika are both significantly less intricate and fall in front of her shoulders. Second, the side saddle position, while typically reserved for female characters, makes sense for Miquella for two different reasons. He presents as a highly feminine young boy, nothing new for FromSoft, and he wears a white dress that would make it impossible to ride any other way, the same white dress he's wearing in his other appearances. Third, the Shadow Tree is clearly seen in this image, meaning that it's impossible for this to be Marika riding on Torrent's back. The Remembrance of the Shadow Tree avatar tells us, the Shadow Tree is the shadow of the Erdtree, born of dark notions that bear no sense of order, that twist and bend its stalk, rendering it brittle. If we take this idea literally, it's telling us the Shadow Tree was born at the same time as the Erdtree, and represents the ideals of the Hornsent that would not fit into Marika's new order. There is an argument that could be made for the Shadow Tree existing before the Erdtree, but I can't subscribe to these ideas due to its clear depiction as the literal shadow of the Erdtree. A shadow can't exist without light, and a light will always cast a shadow. The two trees are inextricably linked, and if they were born together, then Marika was already an adult when the Shadow Tree came into being, making it impossible for her younger self to be riding Torrent and staring at the tree in the distance. With this explanation laid out for why I believe Miquella is the most likely candidate for being Torrent's former master, we can move forward in establishing some kind of relationship between Miquella and Ranni. At the very least, we know the demigods were somewhat civil with each other before the Shattering. They would meet in Leyndell, each in their respective chairs just outside the entrance to the Erdtree, where I assume they would discuss matters of state. However, we don't know how often they associated with each other outside of this venue. We know Radahn spent most of his time in Sellia and had a fondness for Godfrey, also carrying his father's legacy through his fiery red hair. Miquella and Melania were bonded closely as twins, to the point where Melania forsook her place as an Empyrean, and instead acted as Miquella's blade, which is likely the reason neither of them were given shadows. Godwyn the Golden was a hero of the Golden Order, but the only known connection between him and his siblings was with Miquella, and this is based on an assumed affinity for each other, as Miquella took it upon himself to give his brother a true death after he was slain and turned into the Prince of Death. But what if the motivation here was more selfish? Plenty of people believe that Radahn being the promised consort was a mistake, as the information we have about Godwyn seemed to make him a much more likely candidate. But I'm going to go against the grain here and posit that while I do believe Radahn was always the intended consort, it was Godwyn's body that was supposed to house his soul. I believe that Miquella was aware of the Night of Black Knives, and may have even assisted Ranni in some way, maybe even just through silence, in order to secure Godwyn's body for his own purposes. After all, who could have known that slaying Godwyn's soul would create the Prince of Death? Presumably, they were creating a soulless vessel, a perfect body that could have been used in order for Miquella to ascend to godhood. And in doing this, Ranni would be able to slay her flesh, becoming a spirit and subverting the Two Fingers' plans for her to someday house the Elden Ring within herself. Except Ranni, being the mastermind of this plot, may have known the outcome for Godwyn before sending the Black Knife assassins to complete their mission. This would mean Ranni keeps her word to Miquella, but also ensures that his plan could not interfere with her own. After all, what other vessel would be fit for her Lord Brother Radahn's spirit? With this hiccup of Godwyn's body being tainted, Miquella would go on to set his plan in motion, sending Melania to give Radahn a warrior's death in battle, and trying to find a way to purify Godwyn's body through the use of Castle Sol. If he could give Godwyn a true death, then he would have the body he needed to house Radahn. However, as time went on, Miquella would find no way to give his brother a true death, and he needed to make a backup plan. Miquella saw the need to pick a new vessel, and determined that Mohg was the only option he had left available to him. Radahn himself was a mindless beast that needed to be brought down, and who better to take on this task than the Tarnished, a people long exiled from the Lands Between, that had begun finding their way back, guided by grace. It was then that Miquella asked Ranni to take the spirit-calling bell, telling her that whoever becomes his steed's new master would need it in their journey. Ranni, wanting to keep up the facade of an ally, agreed to do this for her stepbrother, anything to keep him off the scent of her true goal. The forever young Empyrean would then orchestrate his capture by Mohg, and made his way to the Land of Shadow, where he met Melina, the sister of Messmer the Impaler, and the only known kindling maiden with the power to burn the Erd Tree. It was to her that Miquella entrusted Torrent, knowing that not only did Melina need a Tarnished to fulfill her role of burning the Erd Tree, but that the Tarnished would need great runes to access Leyndell, and any able to attain those runes could put an end to Mohg and Radahn, giving Miquella the vessel and soul he needed for his ascension. After the death of Mohg, Miquella could start stripping himself of his flesh, and began his pilgrimage to purify his spirit, so that he may ascend to godhood. Ranni had no idea that the defeat of Radahn was needed to set her fate back into motion, until we discovered this information for her. So perhaps the siblings were actually playing each other on the Night of Black Knives, both helping and sabotaging each other where they could, each with their own plans, and the determination and strength of will to see them through. It's by mere happenstance that our Tarnished would come across Ranni again after she fulfilled her duty to Miquella in giving us the tools that would help us tackle the Lands Between. We were the missing piece for both of these plots to find their endings. Unfortunately for Miquella, whether he planned to bring us to his side or never intended for us to follow him at all, we ultimately followed the guidance of grace, the guidance of his mother, and put his dream to an end by defeating his newfound godly power and his promised consort. Whereas we have the opportunity to truly join Ranni, and even become her consort in the new age of stars she brings to the Lands Between. If we believe this theory to be true, then everything truly does come back to the Night of Black Knives, and the death of Godwyn the Golden. This attack not only set in motion the Shattering, but the plans of every demigod who wanted to take the throne for themselves, whether they planned to continue the Order, devour the gods, break the chains of the world, or create a new age of compassion by ascending to godhood. All the bloodshed and tragedy of the Lands Between comes back to this night, and the more stones we turn over, the more it looks like the demigods who weren't involved, or the proud lion, Radahn, the cowardly Godric, the forgotten Mohg, and the loyal Morgott, while the nascent Miquella and his blade Malenia, the serpent Rykard, and the lunar princess Ranni were all too happy to throw away the status quo so that they might uproot this land from its current order. If we believe that Marika too wanted the Night of Black Knives to play out, then we have a leader to each side. Radagon trying to hold the Order together, and Marika, the woman who unbound herself from the Hornsent, only to find that her godhood came with strings that needed to be cut. Each side had a god and 4 demigods, while poor Godwyn, the Golden Sun, was caught in the middle, quite possibly the only innocent casualty of this family. Thank you for listening to my theory on the relationship between Ranni and Miquella, and what this meant for the greater story of the Night of Black Knives, the Shattering, and the Lands Between. Do you think Ranni and Miquella worked together to plot the death of Godwyn? Or was Miquella truly taken by surprise at his brother's death? Was Godwyn always meant to be Miquella's vessel, or was he simply trying to do the right thing by his brother in giving him a true death? Were Miquella and Ranni hiding their true intentions from each other? Do you believe Marika was involved in the plot that killed her son? Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell, and set notifications to all, so you never miss out on any of our lore dives. We look forward to seeing you again for more Elden lore. Disclaimer: we wrote this episode before the release of the new story trailer for Shadow of the Erdtree, and obviously there are now new angles to consider. However, we still wanted to present this story with some small tweaks to have it play better with what we've now seen. Let's have fun in the comments either tearing it apart or building on this new info. Miquella is said to be the fiercest Empyrean, according to his sister Malenia. Understanding the absolute devastation of the clash between Malenia and Radahn, it's terrifying to think that not only does she consider Miquella more imposing than herself, but the man who held back the stars and very nearly destroyed her. Given Miquella's curse and his literal stature, I think it's obvious that this fearsomeness does not refer to sheer brute strength, but to a strength of mind that makes Miquella more dangerous than any other demigod. Miquella is never seen in our journey across the Lands Between, but his traces remain, and we now know he will be a major player in Elden Ring's only DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree. Today we are going to take a look at what we can learn about Miquella and Saint Trina from the base game, and maybe even unravel what is to come next when we enter the Land of Shadow for ourselves. Some of the best examples we have of Miquella's brilliant mind are the Bewitching Branch, the incantation Triple Rings of Light, and Miquella's Needle. Each of these items shows different ways Miquella saw the world and defied its current order. The Bewitching Branch is a tree branch blessed with an incantation of unalloyed gold. Pierce a foe, using FP to turn them into a temporary ally. The Empyrean Miquella is loved by many people. Indeed, he has learned very well how to compel such affection. Here we see Miquella doing something that no other demigod does, turning a creature's allegiance without their consent. The Bewitching Branch makes our enemies into allies, but unlike Rykard's Recusants or Mohg's Bloody Fingers, there's no promise of reward. The branch simply compels them to fight at your side. Triple Rings of Light shows us how Miquella was willing to bend the rules of the Golden Order in order to achieve his own goals. The incantation is a play on Radagon's Rings of Light, which was a gift of gratitude to the young Miquella from his father, Radagon. The young Mikola abandoned fundamentalism, for it could do nothing to treat Malenia's accursed rot. This was the beginning of unalloyed gold. These rings spring forth from the body, while the version of this incantation developed by Mikola shoots rings in 3 directions away from the body, telling us it was a gift from the young Mikola to his father Radagon. Almost as if this incantation was a message to his father that his rings of light would no longer stay confined to the body, so that he could continue his quest for a cure to the rot. Mikola's needle is a fascinating item, as it was developed to keep the rot at bay within Malenia, while he searched for a cure to her affliction. It is described as one of the unalloyed gold needles that Mikola crafted to ward away the meddling of outer gods, capable of subduing the flame of frenzy if inherited, allowing one to cheat fate and avoid becoming Lord of Frenzied Flame. However, the needle is as yet unfinished, and can only be used in the heart of the storm beyond time, said to be found in Far Missoula. While still incomplete, this needle can ward off the influence of outer gods, a power unlike anything seen in the lands between. If you believe the theory that Marika was involved in the Night of Black Knives in order to break the influence of the Greater Will over her land, you can see that Mikola has succeeded where even his mother had failed, even if it was an incomplete success. All of this goes a long way in painting the picture of Mikola as a mastermind with his own goals for his family and the world at large, but none more so than his goal of breaking his own curse through the use of the Halig Tree. Mikola seeked to cure his sister, yes, but he also wanted to undo his curse of eternal youth, and he believed the way to do this was through the power of sleep. Deep sleep within his Halig Tree, and there was no other character more closely tied to sleep than Saint Trina, the mysterious young girl, or boy, who captured the love and attention of people across the lands between. So much so that she inspired her own priest that would take up the mantle of sleep after her disappearance. No matter your thoughts on the connection between Trina and Mikola, the fact that they're connected can't be denied. And while I believe Trina was a secret identity used by Mikola to walk amongst the common folk, others may have a different theory or interpretation here. My thoughts on Mikola and Trina are based in the item descriptions we can uncover about Trina. The Sword of Saint Trina tells us it is a silver sword carried by clerics of Saint Trina, inflicts sleep ailment upon foes, and that Saint Trina is an enigmatic figure. Some say she is a comely young girl, others are sure he is a boy. The only certainty is that their appearance was as sudden as their disappearance. So we know that Trina could have been either a boy or a girl, but given that Mikola is depicted with long braided golden hair and the physique of a young boy, this androgyny is not out of the question, and it's easy to see how Trina could be mistaken for the opposite sex. Saint Trina's torch is described as a candlestand torch that burns with a light purple flame. The carvings depict Saint Trina, but in adult form, somewhat unnervingly. The light purple flame induces sleep. This tells us Saint Trina had the appearance of a child, and the idea of their adult form being unnerving to the people of the lands between, I believe lends credence to their connection as one and the same, due to Mikola never being able to age. Also, the depiction of Saint Trina shows her face covered from the nose up, meaning that this is likely how Trina traveled the land, never revealing her whole face. There's also the matter of the crack under the left eye, which some in the community have supposed could tie Trina, or rather Mikola, to Ronnie and Melina with their eye tattoos. However, I believe this is nothing more than some chipping on the torch, as cracks can be seen throughout the item. We then have the various sleep-inducing items associated with Saint Trina. Trina's arrows are described as being carved to resemble a withered water lily. Affects targets with a powerful sleep effect. Priests of Saint Trina use these arrows to spread their teachings. The sweet oblivion of sleep can become quite the habit. The various fervors cookbooks teach us to create sleep-inducing items using Trina's lilies, and are described as a record of crafting techniques left by a man who was utterly captivated by Saint Trina. He continued the search for her in his slumber. Another strong tie between Mikola and Trina is that the creator of these cookbooks must have gleaned a deeper truth. because his third book teaches us to create a bewitching branch, not an item associated with sleep, but rather the bewitching nature of Miquella himself. I believe this is enough to tie the two characters together definitively, but the question of whether Trina is a projection, a broken off piece of Miquella, or simply an alias used to travel the land is still up for debate. With all of this outlined before us, I believe the game is pointing us in one solid direction when it comes to the Land of Shadow. It exists in the realm of sleep. Miyazaki has stated that the Land of Shadow occupies the same space as the Lands Between, but is disconnected. And the visual motif present throughout the trailer for Shadow of the Erdtree is that of the curtains, hanging in the sky that strongly resemble those of Marika's bedchamber. To me, this is further confirmed that when we enter the Land of Shadow, we're entering a realm of sleep that can only be reached through dreams. I do believe this land once existed on its own, as the description of the DLC tells us the Land of Shadow is a place obscured by the Erdtree, where the goddess Marika first set foot, and it was purged in an unsung battle, set ablaze by Messmer's flame. But in order to lock it away from any who wished to reach it, Marika hid this land within the realm of sleep. There's a theory created by Reddit user All the Heroes Are Dead, which I'll link in the description, that talks about how Marika may have locked away this land and made it inaccessible by ordinary means. They believe that the Land of Shadow is more of an Evergaol situation, and they created an image that shows how the veil we see in the sky during the trailer, and in Marika's bedchamber, could overlap with the 6 Divine Towers, making these towers part of a grand seal that's locked away the Land of Shadow. I believe this theory gives us a solid answer as to how this land was separated from the Lands Between, and that the Evergaol it created can't be opened by traditional means, meaning the only way to access this place now will be through sleep. Through sleep, we lift the veil. Now that we've seen the new story trailer for Shadow of the Erdtree, it looks as if the Land of Shadow was likely a kingdom that was locked behind Shadow after the creation of the Erdtree. I still think the concept of sleep being our only way to reach this place makes sense, but with this new information, we'll see how that idea holds up. The description of the DLC tells us, it was to this land that Miquella departed, divesting himself of his flesh, his strength, his lineage, of all things golden. So Miquella saw the Land of Shadow as his best bet to achieve his goals. He learned all he could about sleep as Saint Trina, and wielded its power for himself. It was through sleep that Miquella would gain the knowledge to break both his sisters and his curses, and in order to do that, he needed to slumber within the Haligtree, which he grew through the power of his own blood. It was after this that Mohg absconded with a cocoon he tore deep from within the Haligtree, and tried to feed it through his blood pits in order to become Miquella's consort, but the cocoon never stirred. The most obvious answer for why this didn't work is that Miquella divested himself of his flesh, so of course he could not respond to Mohg. But I have another theory. I mentioned this during our livestream of the Shadow of the Erdtree trailer, but I believe the hand falling from the cocoon closely resembles that of Messmer the Impaler. And as we know, he existed long before Miquella was born, so they are most likely not the same person. Keeping this in mind, I see the Haligtree in a new light. Perhaps Messmer wrapped in this cocoon was the sapling that Miquella watered with his own blood to grow the tree in the first place. If Miquella uncovered the knowledge of Messmer and the banishment of the Land of Shadow to the realm of sleep, perhaps by watering Messmer's cocoon with his blood, that allowed Miquella to enter this land. After all, this decrepit hand is how we will access the Land of Shadow as well. And this hand reaching out from the cocoon being Miquella's is not the only explanation we have for his divested flesh. It's been pointed out by many before me, but when looking at the roots of the Haligtree, we can see Miquella himself. So perhaps this is what's left of Miquella's body, having become one with his Haligtree, which leaves Messmer as the seed that spawned the tree itself. I'm confident that come this June, when we enter the Land of Shadow, we will do so by touching Messmer's hand within Mohg's chamber and falling into a deep slumber. Led by the words of Saint Trina's followers, we will enter this land of sleep and shadow. We will encounter at least one priest of Trina, perhaps the person who created the Fervor's cookbook, and we will discover more sleep-related incantations from those who made it to this realm before us. After all, the first trailer we saw shows a light purple spell of some sort, and the gloom of sleep hangs thick in the air with ethereal, almost purple skies. From this journey, we will not change the fate of the lands between, but we will come to understand Miquella, Messmer, and the power of slumber. And perhaps this will bring us a better understanding of Elden Ring as a whole. We'll just have to be patient and wait to see if these theories ring true. Thank you for joining us for this exploration of the connection between Miquella and Saint Trina, as well as our theories on the power of sleep itself in the lands between. Do you believe that sleep will play a major role in the lore and story of Shadow of the Erdtree? Is the hand we use to access the Land of Shadow that of Miquella or Messmer? Do you believe Saint Trina is a projection, a being split off from Miquella, a disguise, or her own person altogether? Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell, and set notifications to all so you never miss out on any of our lore dives. We look forward to seeing you again for more Elden lore. The history of Messmer the Impaler has long been hidden by Queen Marika herself. The first son of the Elden Ring's vessel wields a fire so potent he brought the Land of Shadow to its knees at the behest of his mother. This man would wield his curse to do her bidding, and eventually be rewarded with exile. This is what we learned from the story trailer for Shadow of the Erdtree, and now that we can enter the Land of Shadow for ourselves, we can not only face Messmer in battle, but we can uncover the story of his followers, his crusade, and his flame, while also learning the secrets of his origins, and build a timeline of when exactly he was banished. I also have a suspicion that we can more or less confirm both sides of his parentage, thanks to the greater implications of the lore of this land. Today, we will explore Messmer, the keeper of the Land of Shadow, the ever-watchful eye keeping this place in check. I believe the best place to start the story of Messmer is at the very beginning, a place that holds one of the greatest mysteries of the character. Who was his father? In the past, I thought Messmer's parentage would be a curveball, but after playing through the DLC, I've joined the ranks of the masses and believe that Messmer was born to Marika and Radagon, well before Marika became a god. In this time, Marika and Radagon were two separate entities, not yet joined into one flesh. Thanks to Reddit user The Eldritch Creep, I believe we can confirm that Marika and Radagon were together before her marriage to Godfrey, and that calling Radagon back to be the second Elden Lord was not the first time they were wed. There's an item in the Shadow Keep known as the Secret Rite Scroll that explains how one ascends to godhood. A scroll made of white tree bark. Few can decipher the scroll, which describes the secret rite of the Divine Gateway, said to be found at the tower enshrouded by shadow. A lord will usher in a god's return, and the lord's soul will require a vessel. I long suspected that Radagon and Marika were not always one, and upon finding this scroll, I had first assumed it was only meant to explain our current situation in the DLC. But now it seems as though Radagon was the lord who ushered in Marika as a god, and Marika acted as a vessel for her lord's soul. This would make the two inseparable, as they shared a body and had their first children, Messmer and Melina. The idea of Messmer and Melina not only being native to the Land of Shadow, but also related, could seem out of left field. But Messmer's kindling confirms he did have a sibling. The kindling that burned inside Messmer the Impaler, a dark thing eaten away at by a wicked serpent, burns the sealing tree said to be found at the old Rao ruins. Messmer, much like his younger sister, bore a vision of fire. If we consider both that Melina is the kindling maiden, and her words telling us that her mother resides within the Erdtree, it makes sense that she and Messmer were the first of Marika's children, born with curses due to the nature of their parents' union. Mesmer with the base serpent festering within, and Melina, burnt and bodiless, possibly by Mesmer's hand. Mesmer would be the first of the demigods, and he would accompany his mother into the land she became a god of, the lands between. We know he followed her here due to the remembrance of Commander Gaius. Remembrance of Commander Gaius, hewn into the Skadu tree. Both were as elder brothers to the lion, and both were cursed from birth. In spite of, or perhaps because of this very reason, Gaius was both Mesmer's friend and the leader of his men. Since we know Gaius was the first student of the Alabaster Lord who taught both him and Radahn, this would mean the three of them interacted often, and that would not have been done in the Land of Shadow. Along with this confirmation, we also see Mesmer's handiwork on the mountaintop of giants, as many giants are seen impaled and brought to their knees, meaning Mesmer marched alongside Lord Godfrey. Lastly, we have the Impaler's Catacombs, an area that bears Mesmer's moniker, and is likely a tribute to him in some way. We can still see what little remains of how Mesmer left a mark on the lands between, but his true claim to fame is the raising of the Land of Shadow. This attack came at the order of Queen Marika as described by Mesmer's armor. Black armor of Mesmer the Impaler, draped with a red cloak bearing his crest embroidered. On his mother's wishes, Mesmer made himself a symbol of fear, undertaking the cleansing crusade she desired. Direct thy maledictions, thine ire, and thy grief, towards me alone. Mesmer wanted those of the Land of Shadow to blame him for the fires he used to cleanse their land, not to blame his mother. But it seems, unbeknownst to Mesmer, Marika sent him away for her own reasons as well. His remembrance tells us, a malevolent snake writhed within Mesmer, and so his very mother plucked out his eye and put in its place a seal of grace. Yet having done so, her fear compelled her to secret away her child within the realm of shadow, hidden away, keeping company with the original sin and a hatred that would not be confined. Yes, Marika wanted to subjugate the Land of Shadow, but by using Mesmer, she was also able to hide the history of his curse, which I believe to be tied to the origins of his birth, much like Marika's other cursed children, Melania and Mikola. Mesmer himself despised his fire and his snakes, as we can learn from the spell Mesmer's Orb and his helm. The incantation tells us Mesmer despised his own fire. Time and again he hoped to rid himself of it, but ever did it burn. And the helm tells us the winged snakes were Mesmer's constant companions. They were there when the base serpent was sealed away behind his eye. They were there through his eternity of suffering. They will accompany him yet, in his hideous new form, born when he destroyed the grace granted by his mother. They have accepted his fate as much as he. I believe the march against the giants was Mesmer's first attempt to undo his curse of flames. Perhaps by wiping out the giants, he hoped to make their god flee, which would release him. But after this failed, he saw the futility of trying to rid himself of his curse. So it was that Mesmer would lead his forces, which are worthy of their own video diving into their lore, and burn the Land of Shadow to the ground. Given that once we meet Mesmer, he is already missing an eye, I would assume he allowed himself to use the power of the base serpent to achieve his conquest. After this, he would take his place at the top of the Shadow Keep, in the darkest chamber, where he would protect the secrets of his mother, and keep the land sealed in shadow. That is until we arrive, ready to take his flame for ourselves. Upon meeting us, Mesmer has an intense distaste for our kind, the Tarnished.
Mongrel intruder. That tarnished, it seemeth. Mother, wouldst thou truly lordship sanction in one so bereft of light. Yet, my purpose standeth unchanged. Those stripped of the grace of gold shall all meet death. In the embrace of Mesmer's flame.
Mesmer has a deep hatred for all those stripped of grace, though he seems to have none himself aside from the seal placed within his eye by his mother. It stands to reason that Mesmer was still in the Lands Between during Godfrey's exile, and the subsequent stripping of grace from all the Tarnished. Given his line about our potential ascension, it seems clear that Marika did not tell him her intention was always for us to grow strong and return to her Golden Lands. Without this understanding, he sees us as more of a usurper to the Golden Order, and fights us with everything he has. When pushed to his limit, we see his true strength.
I will not suffer. A lord devoid of light. No, Mother. Forgive me. Soon tarnished. Wilt thou be taken in the jaws of the abyssal serpent shorn of light?
We now face Mesmer at his strongest, the full might of his fire and serpents on display. The only way to claim his flame is to strike him down, and so we do, putting an end to the story of Mesmer the Impaler. Mesmer is yet another pitiable god, a child of an obscenely selfish woman who would use her children in order to further her own bid for power. He was nothing more than a pawn, and eventually a source of shame that needed to be hidden away, along with the entire Land of Shadow, in order for Marika to claim her divinity to be legitimate. Mesmer has no frame of reference for the current state of the world thanks to his banishment. He's unaware of the Shattering, and never received a Great Rune. His name was scrubbed from the history of the Lands Between, even though he had such an integral role in establishing it. In the end, Mesmer and his flames of doom and destruction were confined and locked away from the eyes of those who would bask in honeyed rays of gold. Yet again, a cruel fate is bestowed on someone whose original sin was not of their own doing, but rather the union of Queen Marika and her consort, Radagon. Thank you for joining us for this look at the history of Mesmer the Impaler. Do you think we covered everything there is to know about this demigod? Do you believe Radagon was Mesmer's father, and that Marika acted as his vessel so she could attain godhood? How long do you think Mesmer stayed in the Lands Between before being sent off to scorch the Land of Shadows? Is the younger sister mentioned in Mesmer's kindling Melina? Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell, and set notifications to all so you never miss out on any of our lore dives. We look forward to seeing you again for more Elden lore. If you're familiar with our Elden lore series, you know I've never been shy about sharing my thoughts on the Fingers and what I believe to be their ultimate betrayal of our Tarnished. The Fingers are said to lead us down the path of becoming Elden Lord, but in truth, it's grace that guides us, and grace which pushes us to the foot of the Erd Tree, where we face Morgott and attempt to take the Elden Throne. At this point, the Fingers are at a loss for how to open the Erd Tree, and claim to be attempting to commune with the Greater Will. I've always believed this is a farce, and the Fingers push Tarnished to fight the Demigods because they believe it to be an impossible task. To put it plainly, I think the Fingers are deceptive, and much like White Mask Vare, I never thought they had our best interest at heart. Just to be clear, that's where my opinions stop lining up with Vare's. Now that I've played Shadow of the Erd Tree and learned the secrets of Meter, the Mother of Fingers, my suspicions have been validated. Because as it turns out, no one, man or finger, truly knows the path forward envisioned by the Greater Will, if there was one at all. Today, we will unravel the truth of Meter and the Fingers. According to Hyetta, the Maiden of the Three Fingers, in the beginning, there was only the one Great. Then the Greater Will stepped in. The Greater Will fractured the one Great, which led to life as we know it in the lands between. From here, the Greater Will saw the need to impose some level of order across the land, and sent a falling star containing the Elden Beast down to become the Elden Ring. This was known to us through the description of the incantation Elden Stars. The Elden Remembrance gives us more background on the Elden Beast. It was the vassal beast of the Greater Will, and living incarnation of the concept of order. So it was that the Greater Will created both life and, through its vassal, order. What exactly this order was, and when it started, is up for debate. But if we consider that Placidusax was an Elden Lord in the time before the Erd Tree, we can make some assumptions. We know that the Dragon Lord's god fled the lands between, and if we look at the way he waits in the heart of the storm beyond time, his head seemed to be forming a position very similar to that of the Fingers, when they're attempting to commune with the Greater Will. If we assume the Greater Will was Placidusax's god, then we can also assume that the Elden Beast must have been sent to the lands between after the Greater Will fled. However, the Elden Beast does not lead the rulers of the lands between. It's a source of power, the very Elden Ring itself. So the question used to be, where did the Fingers come from, and how did they know what the Greater Will wanted for the land? And now we have some answers. Meter, the Mother of Fingers, much like the Elden Beast, is a child of the Greater Will, also sent down to the lands between from space. The remembrance of the Mother of Fingers tells us, the mother of all two Fingers and Finger Creepers was in turn a magnificently gleaming daughter of the Greater Will, and the first shooting star to fall upon the lands between. It would seem the Mother of Fingers was the first of these children to reach the surface, and perhaps that's how Placidusax knew how to commune with the Greater Will before the time of the Erd Tree. It learned how from its own fingers. This remembrance allows us to create the Staff of the Great Beyond, which is described as a staff fashioned from the tail fingers of Meter, the Mother of Fingers, and the microcosm raised aloft over the crux they form. It tells us, the Mother receives signs from the Greater Will from the beyond of the microcosm. Despite being broken and abandoned, she kept waiting for another message to come. Aside from this staff, we can also create the Gazing Finger, which is described as the head of Meter, the Finger Mother, wielded as a weapon without modification. From within the center of the fingerprint that wrinkles the creature's foremost protrusion, a tiny wart-like eye gazes vacantly into the beyond. These descriptions lead me to believe that in the time before the Erd Tree, living beings were actually able to discern instructions from the Greater Will, thanks to its first daughter, Meter. She would communicate with her parent through the microcosm, which we can see on her staff, sending and receiving messages in turn. So what changed? We can't say for sure what caused the Greater Will to flee the Lands Between. Perhaps it got bored with its creations asking for assistance in how to live their lives and rule their lands. Or maybe it took issue with Baal and Placidusax doing battle over the current order of the world and was disappointed with Placidusax for not ending Baal outright. Whatever the reason, I believe the Greater Will sent down the Elden Beast to bring order to the Lands Between, so it would no longer have to interact with its creations. It would impose order through a god that would ascend using the instructions provided to Meter and passed down to her children. If I were to speculate, this could be why Meter suddenly has her connection to the Greater Will severed, able to send messages through the microcosm, but not able to receive any word back. When speaking with Enya, she says the Greater Will has not abandoned the realm, nor the life that inhabits it. But we know that Enya is getting her information from the Two Fingers, an entity that has a vested interest in making sure the Tarnished think it is all-knowing and able to provide them with the path forward. In the intro cinematic of Elden Ring, we're told that the Lands Between was abandoned by the Greater Will due to the Shattering, which would contradict this statement, but the Japanese translation clears this up. The direct translation tells us, Marika's children, Demigods, received fragments of the Elden Ring. That power corrupted them, causing the Shattering War, where there was no lord at the end of the battle. They were abandoned by the Greater Will. This more directly implies that it was only the demigod children of Marika who were abandoned, and not the land as a whole. However, both of these explanations are directly contradicted by Count Ymir in Shadow of the Erdtree. This scholar of all things fingers tells us,
There never was any hope. They were each of them defective, unhinged from the start. Marika herself, and the fingers that guided her.
This strongly implies that by the time the Fingers were guiding Marika as an Empyrean, they were already cut off from communicating with the Greater Will through their mother, meaning it had abandoned the land long ago, and they were now trying to guide Empyreans the best they could, without a full understanding of what they were supposed to do next. Thanks to MoxieWatts for pointing out these base game contradictions, as well as providing me with the Japanese translation from Reddit user The Deep Dark Abyss. Once Meter's sibling reached the Lands Between, the Greater Will washed its hands of this place, and left to explore the cosmos. I'm referring to the Elden Beast as Meter's sibling because the legendary incantation, Elden Stars, tells us it is said that long ago, the Greater Will sent a golden star bearing a beast into the Lands Between, which would later become the Elden Ring. This makes the Elden Beast the second being sent to the Lands Between by the Greater Will. This then left a hole in the future of the Lands Between. Who would ascend to godhood and create the Erdtree, and how was this done? Given that we do have the secret Rite Scroll which outlines how to become a god, I believe these were the instructions left to Meter. We know the rite within the scroll works because Marika ascended to godhood, as did Miquella, even if his method left him bodiless. So the only logical origin point of the secrets contained within the scroll would be Meter, the only being capable of truly communing with the Greater Will. However, I believe this scroll could be interpreted multiple ways, and without the Greater Will's guidance, Meter simply decided for herself what it meant, and passed these words down to her children, the Two Fingers. During his questline, Count Ymir shares some interesting information with us. He tells us Miquella saw that his roots were mired in madness, and that the fault lies with the Mother, implying Marika. But after speaking with him again, he elaborates.
Recall what I said, that Marika and the fingers that guided her were unsound from the start. Well, the truth lies deeper still. It is their mother who is damaged and unhinged. The fingers are but unripe children, victims in their own right. We all need a mother, do we not? A new mother. A true mother who will not give birth to further malady.
By following this quest, we see how Ymir's mind has truly unraveled. But in this, we can assume he's correct. The Fingers simply listen to their mother, and if their mother is blankly staring into space, incapable of discerning what comes next without the guidance of a god who's no longer there, then the Fingers simply have to wing it and make assumptions about what we need to do. I believe that this is what sets into motion the events of Elden Ring. The shattering is brought about because each Two Fingers has their own idea of who should be Elden Lord, and each has the ears of their own demigods. Ranni's fingers see her as the next vessel for the Elden Ring, and so she slays them to avoid her fate. Other fingers hold the power of their demigods' great runes, and whether dead or alive, they're now unable to communicate. The fingers of the Round Table Hold saw the danger of a tarnish changing the world to suit their own whims, and intentionally misdirect us, trying to play off the guidance of grace as part of their own machinations. Just as everyone in the Lands Between fumbles for meaning, so too do the Fingers, who claim to be envoys of the greater will. Without their god's guidance and abandoned by their mother, they're simply trying their best to find a way forward, whatever that may be. Perhaps this is why they make one last attempt to communicate with the greater will once we reach the foot of the Erdtree. The Cipher Pata and the Coded Sword both show us how the Fingers communicated through light, and Ratatoskr has previously mentioned how he believes that the reason it would take thousands of years for the Fingers to receive an answer from the greater will is due to how long it would take light to travel the cosmos to their grandparent. After all, the Fingers don't seem to have the ability to use the microcosm in the way their mother does. I like this theory, but I'd layer on top of it that even if the greater will did receive the message, I don't believe it has any interest in answering. With all this said, there was a set of Fingers born to Metter that had another plan. Instead of moving forward, they would guide a new lord to move back. The Finger Creepers and Two Fingers are both born from Metter, so it stands to reason that the Three Fingers were as well. If each set of Fingers is fumbling for meaning and answers as their connection to the greater will has been disconnected, then it makes sense that the Three Fingers were brought into this world with their own views. The Three Fingers see the insanity of eternally reaching out to a god that abandoned its creations, begging for meaning and direction, and instead believe the entire experiment itself is the issue. In the estimation of the Three Fingers, the problem started with the greater will fracturing the One Great, so the only solution is to burn it all away, return to one. There's no reason to reach out to the greater will, if we simply returned from whence we came, and their Lord of Frenzied Flame is capable of doing just that. Metter, the Mother of Fingers, first daughter of the greater will, is the original abandoned child of a god. Her entire purpose was to act as a mouthpiece for the greater will, and as the world grew, she sent her children to act as these mouthpieces as well. Her connection to the greater will allowed her to receive messages, and the Two Fingers' connection to her meant they could relay these messages as well. Unfortunately, the fickle nature of gods affects even their own offspring, just as we saw from Marika and the way she treated her children. If anything, the story of Metter proves that the world envisioned by the greater will no longer matters. What comes next is up to our Tarnished. The future will be crafted by man, not gods. Whether we choose to repair the Elden Ring and create a world with our own ideals, abandon the world created by the greater will in order to travel the stars with Our Lady, or burn it all back to one, the future is not crafted by those above, but by those below. Those that were left to clean up the mess of a god that couldn't be bothered to oversee its creation. We can only hope that Metter finds some kind of solace after our battle with her, as she escapes into the microcosm. I believe she could have done this at any time, but chose not to, as she didn't want to leave her children the same way that she was left behind. But when your options are to be put to the blade or flee, it would seem escaping was the better option. Perhaps she will one day find the greater will, and discover why it abandoned her, and the land it cultivated. Thank you for joining us for our dissection of Metter, the Mother of Fingers. Why do you believe the greater will left the world it created behind? When do you think Metter's connection to the greater will was severed? Was she still able to communicate with the two fingers of the lands between after the Land of Shadow was sealed away? Or does her plane exist alongside it? Why did the Greater Will choose for its daughter and envoy to take the shape of fingers? Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell, and set notifications to all so you never miss out on any of our lore dives. We look forward to seeing you again for more Elden Lore. Queen Marika the Eternal is a deity of unmatched mystique and power. She is the vessel for the Elden Ring, the mother of demigods, ruler of the lands between, and vassal of the Greater Will. Our goal from the very start has been to repair the Elden Ring, repair Marika, who sits broken inside the Erd Tree, so that we can ascend and become Elden Lord. Marika has always been the catalyst for the events of our story. She's responsible for the shattering, as she brought her hammer down on the Elden Ring. She set our story in motion. It's easy to see this woman, this god, and imagine her motivations to be unknowable to mere mortals. But thanks to Shadow of the Erd Tree, those hidden truths have been uncovered. And what we found is the story of a victim of genocide, who refused to allow her oppressors to take her life, as they did the rest of her people. Queen Marika the Eternal and her people, the shamans, once sat at the absolute bottom of society, which makes her ascension all the more extraordinary. The history of the shamans is the history of Queen Marika. They are a race of people originating from the Land of Shadows. The shamans were born without horns, and were thought to be both inferior and divine simultaneously by the Hornsent. This divinity gave them a place in the ancient rituals of the Hornsent, but that place was one of blood, sacrifice, and horror. Upon reaching Bonnie Village, we see how exactly the Hornsent treated the shaman people. They were nothing more than sacrifices, lambs to the slaughter. In this village roam the greater potentates, who take on a much more menacing tone now that we know of their true origins. Previously, Jarbairn told us that a potentate was simply someone with smooth hands who protected the jars. Now we know that they were actually butchers, much more reminiscent of Anastasia Tarnished Eater. These enemies carry only 2 items and are otherwise naked, possibly as part of their ritual. The potentates wield the Bonnie butchering knife, an outsized butcher's cleaver used to dismember human bodies in the making of great jars stored in jails. They also wear the Caterpillar Mask, which is a grotesque mask constructed from countless solidified caterpillars, a ritual implement of the greater potentates of Bonnie Village, used to ward off thoughts of impurity, doubt, temptation, and other wickedness one is vulnerable to while absorbed in divine ritual. An interesting note here is that the same mask is worn by Hornsent, our companion, as we search for kindly Mikola. So it seems he too may have been a potentate in his past. We can start to see a picture being painted of just what the Hornsent did to the shamans, but nearby there's a shack that gives us even more detail on these matters. When we reach the whipping hut, we find the Tooth Whip and a wandering spirit. The spirit seems trapped in a moment from their life, speaking the words, "For pity's sake, your place is in the jar. Nigh sainthood awaits within. For shamans like you, this is your lot. Life you were accorded for this alone." The Tooth Whip sheds light on this statement. Whip bestrewn with rotting, misshapen teeth. Filthy and seething with disease, the teeth are embedded in the whip, and dose the victim with deadly poison upon each strike. As the wounds ripen, they grow inflamed and ooze pus. The flesh of shamans was said to meld harmoniously with others. So the Hornsent potentates engaged in these rituals, where they would butcher the shamans and stuff them into jars so that their flesh could meld together and create some new form of life, and this process was seen as divine. The final confirmation of this comes from the item Innard Meat, which can be found in each jail. Scraps of flesh for filling great jars. Rancorous spirits cling to the pinkish-red twitching meat, throw at enemies to inflict damage. This is what becomes of the condemned, who get sliced up and stuffed into jars to become saints instead. It seems some shaman actually believed in this practice, as the Great Jar Helm tells us it is a great jar which fits comfortably over the head when upturned, attire of the shamans who perform their worship at jails. They offer their prayers to the innards of the great jars, such that they might be reborn one day into sainthood. This is the cycle of death and rebirth, taken into the hands of mortal men. Some of the shamans kept in jails seem to think the innards of these jars would someday achieve sainthood, whatever that meant for them. But I have a different theory. While the shamans in jails may have thought this process would end in sainthood, there are also hornsent inside these jails. A spirit of one of these hornsent can be found, and they say, "Oh please, not the jar, anything but that. I promise I won't ever do it again. I swear a living saint I'll surely be. Please, you must forgive me. Forgive me, please." Hornsent and shaman alike were placed within the jars, but I believe the hornsent were only placed in them after the shamans became the hideous amalgams of flesh we see whenever their jars are opened. These things all appear female and bear a striking resemblance to Queen Marika herself. When they attack us, they grab us with flesh and pull us in, trying to assimilate us into the mass. What I think this all comes back to is the idea of all life being conjoined within the crucible, and what that would mean for the hornsent should they want to achieve godhood. If we take a look at the Gate of Divinity from both the cinematic trailer of Shadow of the Erdtree and the final boss area of the game, we see bodies melded together in mounds of flesh. Among these bodies we see both shaman and hornsent, which to me reads as their understanding of the divine rituals being about conjoining life in order to open the gates to godhood. Perhaps this is how the hornsent believed they could become closer to the crucible, by using these people with malleable bodies to meld together life itself through divine right. This is where we stand in our understanding of the treatment of the shamans, and perhaps this would be the way things always were, had a young woman not been born amongst them, who was chosen as an Empyrean by her own 2 fingers. With the birth of Marika, the wheels of change were set in motion. Change and revenge. Marika was likely born to an area just past the Shadowkeep, known as the Shaman Village, where her people presumably lived in relative peace until the day they were taken away for the slaughter. At some point, the 2 fingers chose her as an Empyrean, capable of ascending to godhood, and Marika used this to eventually bring that dream to fruition, but we don't know exactly how she was able to do this. The Empyrean Grand Dame refers to her as a strumpet, which implies Marika may have used her feminine charm in order to work her way up the ladder of royalty and attain her goals. This lines up well with the cinematic trailer, where Letta tells us Mikola spoke of the seduction and betrayal, an affair from which gold arose. However, given the hornsent's hatred of Marika, I do believe this interpretation should be taken with a grain of salt. Regardless, Marika used the gateway to become the vessel for the Elden Ring and ascend to godhood, possibly with the intention of ruling over a land where her people would never experience the cruelty of the Land of Shadows again. A land with no death, bathed in honeyed rays of gold. When it comes to how Marika was able to ascend, I believe I have a solid theory. In order to become a god, one must have prepared a lord and a vessel. For Mikola, the lord was Radahn and the vessel was Mohg, and he himself became a god. For Marika, I believe that through the use of her shaman flesh, she was able to act as both vessel and god, ascending to godhood, while also acting as a vessel for her lord, Radagon. This would explain their duality, 2 people sharing one body, and their nature as 2 people in one could also be the reason for their children's afflictions. Mesmer born with his flames in the abyssal serpent, Melina born burned and bodiless, Melania born with the scarlet rot, and Mikola born with eternal youth. I believe that after she ascended and opened a door to the lands between, Marika took one last trip back home. She walked to the center of her village and cast a secret incantation, Minor Erdtree, an incantation she would pass down to her daughter, Melina. Secret incantation of Queen Marika. Only the kindness of gold, without order. Creates a small illusory Erd tree that continuously restores the HP of nearby allies. Marika bathed the village of her home in gold, knowing full well that there was no one to heal. There was no one left for Marika to say goodbye to. The rest of the shaman were either used in divine rituals, or followed Marika out of the Land of Shadows and became known as the Newmen. But she had one last place where she needed to pay her respects. In front of a wooden carving of a woman within a tree trunk, we find the golden braid. A braid of golden hair cut loose, Queen Marika's offering to the grandmother, boosts holy damage negation by the utmost. What was her prayer, her wish, her confession? There's no one left to answer, and Marika never returned home again. Perhaps this grandmother was like a deity to the shaman, because this is where Marika left a portion of her golden hair. This braid is the reason every depiction of Marika shows her with hair longer on one side than the other. She left this piece of herself out of respect for her home, her traditions, and after this, she never set foot in the village of her birth again. This is not where the story ends though, as we know Marika would later wage war on the Land of Shadow, and pay back their atrocities against her people tenfold. For a time, the Lands Between and the Land of Shadow must have existed alongside one another. We know from the remembrance of the Wild Boar Rider that Mesmer and Gaius were like older brothers to Radahn, so it stands to reason that at least up to the point where Radahn was studying gravity sorceries, Mesmer resided in the Lands Between. It would be some time between Radahn's studies and the Shattering that Marika would send her son to the Land of Shadow, in order to purge the lands and hide the secret of her history. I think in terms of the timeline, if we're to assume that my theory of Radagon and Marika merging at the Divine Gate is correct, she'd want to do this before she called on Radagon to be the next Elden Lord, so that the secret of their union would be well kept. This would lead to the purge of the Land of Shadows, Mesmer's flames stretching across the land and taking the horn scent with them. This plan was twofold, as while Marika cared for her son as seen in the description of Marika's blessing, she needed Mesmer to be hidden away within the realm of shadow, due to his affliction with his very flame, and the hatred he could not confine. She also set out to show the Hornson exactly what it was like to live in a world where your people were used as nothing but fodder for another who considered you inferior. The furnace golems can be seen as part of Mesmer's assault during the trailer for Shadow of the Erdtree, and we find them in each area of the Land of Shadow. These giant enemies are burning the bodies of so many horn scent in order to stay lit, and through the furnace visage and the hefty furnace pot, we learn more about them. A smaller imitation of the furnace golem's visage, a stone mask surrounded by curled horns, depicting the fell god of fire that haunts the sagas of the horn scent. Craftable item prepared using a capacious cracked pot, imbued with the hex of the furnace, thrown at an enemy to create a whirlwind of flame. The furnace's flame burns away both body and soul. When impurity is thus expunged, one calls it cleansing. So the horn scent know of the fell god's flame, and they fear it because it burns not only body, but soul, and their entire religion seems to be based around spirits. Every horn scent body used to keep the fires burning is a mirror to every shaman body cut up and used in pot rituals. Marika traded divine ritual for cleansing ritual, and the horn scent would know what it was to have no power over their own fate. In this way, Queen Marika the Eternal, who strove to create a land without death, where all could live in harmony, proved herself a hypocrite, unable to put the past behind her. She perpetuated the cycle of violence instead of rising above, and ultimately, it's up to us to consider whether or not this was justified. From what we know of cycles, it seems likely that kindly Miquella's new world would fall to the same hypocrisy over time, so maybe it's best that a Tarnish sets a new course for the Lands Between, and ascends to the throne of the Elden Lord. Before wrapping this up, I had a few other thoughts about how Marika's past as a shaman came to shape the Lands Between, I believe the new revelation that shaman flesh was malleable actually shed some light on grafting, as well as Rykard's ability to take control of the world-eating serpent. Godric the Grafted attempted to make himself more powerful by grafting the parts of great warriors onto his own body, and perhaps it was the flesh he inherited from his lineage that allowed him to practice this art in the first place. As far as we see, only Godric himself practices grafting, and we assume his scions likely share his lineage, which means he would have been able to graft them. When it comes to Rykard, being devoured by the serpent should have spelled the end for him, but through the power of his great rune he retained himself and was able to take control. But what if it was not just the great rune, but his very body that made it possible for him to become the blasphemous creature we do battle with? The serpent grows Rykard's arms, and his face is protruding from its neck. To me, this lines up with how shaman flesh is able to conjoin to the flesh of others. Finally, kindly Miquella seemed to be casting aside every piece of himself in order to achieve godhood. I believe this is the inverse of how his mother achieved her goal, as Miquella did not use his shaman flesh to meld with the Lord. Rather, he divested himself of the very body that made him a shaman, and instead came to be what looks like a pure golden spirit. Perhaps we'll discuss this more thoroughly at some point in the future. Queen Marika the Eternal likely suffered a life of indignity before ascending to godhood. Her people were used as fodder for divine ritual, some even thinking they would reach a higher plane if they just believed hard enough in the power of the jars. I think Marika saw through this, especially as an Empyrean with her own 2 fingers guiding her path. She would find her way to the divine gate by using every resource she had at her disposal, and take godhood for herself, regardless of the consequences. And with power like that, power to crush one's enemies, those who wronged her and her people, the temptation was too great. Marika did not attack the Land of Shadow right away. She lived alongside this land and its people until the day of her betrayal, when she ordered it be set ablaze by the flames of her first son. Marika, the shaman girl chosen by fate, took her revenge on the Hornsent, and by exploring the Land of Shadow, we come to understand the consequences of these actions, and the path it set her youngest son on to right her wrongs and take godhood for himself. Thank you for joining us as we explored the history of Queen Marika the Eternal, from her humble roots in the shaman village to the purging of the Land of Shadow. What did you think of our timeline of these events? Do you believe Marika used her shaman flesh as a way to become a vessel for her Lord Radagon? What did the Hornsent hope to achieve by melding life using the bodies of the shaman to create the Divine Gate? Was Marika's betrayal her attack on the Land of Shadow, or her taking godhood for herself as a lowly shaman? What was the prayer Marika uttered before leaving her home forever? Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell, and set notifications to all so you never miss out on any of our lore dives. We look forward to seeing you again for more Elden Lore.